Ethan Carter stood up. Every other pilot in that briefing room had just walked out, 9 of them, one by one, sliding back their chairs in silence and heading straight for the door. Veterans, captains, men with thousands of hours in the air between them. But Ethan walked toward the recruiter's desk instead. "Tell Miss Sterling," he said, voice as steady as a compass needle locked on true north. "I'll take the job." Nobody in that room had warned him what happened to the last 9 pilots. And nobody told him that Victoria Sterling was already betting he wouldn't last a week. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button because you do not want to miss where this goes. The recruiter's name was Gerald Whitmore, and he had been placing corporate aviation pilots for 22 years. He had put men in the cockpits of jets owned by oil executives, tech billionaires, a former senator who refused to fly over open water, and once memorably, a country music star who insisted the aircraft be stocked with a specific brand of hot sauce that was only available in 3 states. In 22 years, Gerald Whitmore had seen everything. He had never seen a Thursday morning like this one. By 9:47 a.m., the last of the 9 pilots had pushed his chair back and walked out of the glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of Sterling Aero's downtown Chicago headquarters. No goodbyes. No explanations. Just the sound of dress shoes on marble and the soft mechanical click of the elevator button. Gerald looked down at his clipboard. Then he looked up. Ethan Carter was still sitting at the table. He was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, with the particular kind of stillness that doesn't come from being relaxed, it comes from discipline. The practiced, built-into-the-bone stillness of a man who has spent years in a cockpit where the difference between calm and panic is the difference between landing and not landing. He had a manila folder on the table and a paper coffee cup that had gone cold 90 minutes ago, and he hadn't touched it. Gerald cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, you understand that this position has now been declined by 9 qualified aviators in the past month alone." "I heard." "Some of those men had significantly more flight hours than I know." "Then surely you understand why I'm asking whether you'd like to take some additional time to consider." "Mr. Whitmore." Ethan looked at him directly, not aggressively, just directly the way a man looks at another man when he needs him to stop talking and start listening. "I spent 8 years flying combat missions where a wrong decision meant people died. I have landed aircraft in zero visibility conditions in mountain crosswinds with hydraulic failures. One time, I took a bird strike that knocked out 40% of engine 2, and I put that aircraft down at a regional airfield in the dark on a runway that barely qualified as one." He paused. "I am not afraid of this job, and I don't need more time." Gerald stared at him. "The salary is $9,000 a month," he said finally. "Travel allowance and a housing subsidy during extended transit periods." Ethan didn't blink. "When do I start with your bed?" But to understand why Ethan Carter walked toward that desk instead of the door, you have to go back 18 months. His wife's name was Sarah. She was the kind of woman who remembered the name of every server who had ever brought her coffee, who kept a bowl of candy by the front door in October, not because they had trick-or-treaters in the neighborhood, but because she said you never knew who needed something sweet. She had taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary for 11 years. She could whistle any Beatles song on request, including the hard ones. She made terrible pancakes and refused to discuss it. She was 38 years old when the oncologist sat across from them and used the word stage 4. Sophie had been 4.5 at the time, old enough to know something in the house had shifted. Too young to understand what forever meant when it was used in a sentence that ended in without. Ethan did 3 things when they got home from that appointment. He sat in his truck in the driveway for 20 minutes with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel. Then he walked inside and told Sophie they were going to make her favorite dinner spaghetti with the jarred meatballs that Sarah always called cheating and Ethan always called efficiency. He waited until Sophie was asleep before he let himself fall apart. He only let himself do that once. The next 14 months were the hardest of his life. and Ethan Carter had landed aircraft in war zones. He learned which brands of children's shampoo Sophie would tolerate and which ones triggered a meltdown. He learned that the emotional state of a 6-year-old can turn completely on its head at 7:15 in the morning, and that being 5 minutes late to school. Drop-off requires the exact same calm, methodical response as a cockpit warning light. He learned that grief doesn't arrive the way you expect it to. It doesn't crash into you all at once. It slips in through the small doors. The Tuesday evening, he set 2 coffee mugs out of habit, and then stood, holding one of them for a full minute, not knowing what to do with it. The Saturday morning, Sophie looked up at the sky and asked very seriously whether Mommy could hear them when they talked out loud. He had to clear his throat twice before he could answer that one. He told her yes. He believed it too. Or he made himself believe it. In Ethan Carter's experience, that amounted to the same thing. After Sarah passed, the money lasted 4 months. He had his veterans benefits. He had the savings account they'd built together, which looked like enough until it met the reality of a mortgage, a car payment, Sophie's medical appointments, and 2 months of hospice bills that insurance had covered in the way insurance covers things, partially slowly, and with a lot of paperwork that felt like it was designed to discourage you from finishing it. The commercial carriers weren't hiring at his seniority level. A cargo company offered him a night shift route 3 weeks out of every 4, gone before Sophie went to bed and back after she'd already left for school. He looked at that offer for a long time. Then he said no. Sophie was 6 years old. She had already lost her mother. He was not going to be the second parent to disappear. His brother called from Denver and offered money. Ethan thanked him and said no. It cost him something to say it, but he said it. There are certain things a man has to work through on his own terms, and Ethan Carter understood with the blunt clarity of someone who'd spent a decade making hard calls that he was one of those men. He picked up weekend shifts at the regional flight school teaching instrument ratings. He mowed 2 lawns on his street. He was not ashamed of any of it, but it wasn't enough, and the number at the bottom of his bank statements was moving in the wrong direction, slow and steady and patient the way bad news always is. The morning he found the job posting, he'd been up since 5. Sophie had a bad night, a nightmare she couldn't describe and didn't want to talk about, and Ethan had spent 45 minutes sitting on the edge of her bed, one hand on her back, not talking, just present, which was, in his experience, the only thing that actually helped. He made coffee and opened his laptop on the kitchen counter. He checked the 5 job boards. He checked every morning the way a pilot checks an aircraft before flight. Systematically, no steps skipped regardless of whether you expect to find something. It was the discipline that mattered, not the expectation. The listing was under private aviation corporate contracts. Seeking experienced private aviation pilot. Minimum 5,000 flight hours, instrument-rated business jet type rating preferred. Full-time position based in Chicago, with domestic and international travel. Compensation competitive. Client has specific operational requirements. Multiple previous candidates have found this position unsuitable. Serious applicants only. He read it 3 times. Specific operational requirements. Multiple previous candidates have found this position unsuitable. He sat back in his chair. Most people reading that would hear alarm bells. Ethan heard something else. He heard a problem that had so far not found the right person to solve it. He picked up his phone. The number at the bottom of the listing connected to Sterling Aero's placement service. He called at 7:03 a.m. Gerald Whitmore answered on the second ring. Sterling Aero Whitmore Placement Services. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm calling about the pilot position. There was a pause, just half a second, but Ethan noticed it. Mr. Carter, are you currently familiar with the full scope of this position? I'd like to be. Are you available Thursday morning? I'm available today. Gerald's office smelled like burned coffee and low-grade anxiety. His desk was buried in manila folders. He had the specific look of a man who had explained a difficult situation too many times and was running out of patience with the way it kept coming out. Victoria Sterling took over as CEO of Sterling Aero Technologies 2 years ago after the death of her father, Gerald said. You may remember the news coverage. Ethan nodded. He remembered it. Richard Sterling, industry legend founder. The man who had built Sterling Aero from a regional parts manufacturer into a global aerospace supplier. The plane had gone down in the Rocky Mountains during a winter storm. Richard Sterling didn't survive. His daughter had. But not without a cost. Miss Sterling sustained a spinal cord injury in the crash. She uses a wheelchair full-time. She has been medically cleared to travel, which she does extensively. She operates on 5 continents. She needs a dedicated pilot who can meet an aggressive schedule and adapt to the specific logistics involved in traveling with a wheelchair-using executive. That's manageable, Ethan said. Gerald looked at him carefully. On paper, yes. The difficulty has been finding a pilot whose behavior in the cockpit and on the tarmac reflects that view. What happened to the 9? Gerald exhaled. 4 resigned voluntarily. 2 were terminated. Miss Sterling described both incidents as condescension with an instrument rating. 1 quit after the second flight, claiming the scheduling was unreasonable. 1 filed a formal complaint with the Aviation Authority, claiming Miss Sterling's travel requirements constituted a safety concern. Was there anything in the actual flight data to support that claim? Not a single entry. Then what was his actual objection? Gerald looked at him directly. He believed she should not be running the company. He communicated that opinion. She terminated him before he reached the elevator. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What about the 9th? Gerald's jaw tightened slightly. The 9th, he said carefully, made a comment about the crash, about whether she was his word tempting fate by flying at all. Ethan looked at him, said nothing. Miss Sterling was in the aircraft when her father died, Gerald said quietly. She has flown over 200 hours since her recovery. I know, Ethan said. That's not tempting fate. That's refusing to be beaten by it. Gerald stared at him for a long moment. Then he slid a folder across the desk. Her standard monthly schedule. Ethan opened it and took his time reading. Gerald watched him the way some people fidget when they read nervous energy bleeding out through their fingers, and the way others go completely still. Ethan went completely still. Boston Tuesday, Dallas Friday, Tokyo in 3 weeks, Ethan said. London for a board presentation 6 weeks out. That's a light month. I've flown worse tempo. He closed the folder, set up the interview. He told Sophie about it at dinner. He hadn't meant to. She was 6, she didn't need the details of his job applications. But Sophie had inherited from her mother an unsettling ability to look at him across a table and know that something had shifted. Daddy, she said, her fork suspended over her mac and cheese. Did something happen today? I have a job interview Thursday. Flying job. Private jet for a business executive. Sophie turned this over with the seriousness she applied to most things. Is it a good job? Could be. Will you be gone a lot? He chose his words carefully. Some. But we'll figure it out. Mrs. Kaminsky said she's always happy to be around when I need to travel. Sophie made a face. She smells like mothballs. She also keeps excellent snacks. The good animal crackers or the store ones. I'll make it part of the arrangement. Sophie nodded, satisfied. She went back to her dinner. Then after a moment, without looking up, Daddy, I hope you get the job. Ethan looked at his daughter. Dark hair, serious brown eyes, exactly like her mother's. He felt the familiar ache, the one that had lived in his chest for so long, now that it had become part of the architecture of him, something he'd learned to breathe around. Me too, Bug, he said. Me too. Thursday came cold and gray, the way March mornings in Chicago come with a wind off the lake that cuts clean through a jacket and reminds you that the city doesn't care about your plans. He wore his best suit. Not to impress, he was past the age where clothes felt like armor. But because Victoria Sterling was a professional, and she deserved to meet one. Sterling Aero's headquarters was a glass tower built to announce permanence. Ethan took the elevator to 14, checked in at reception, and sat down to wait. He was there 20 minutes. He used the time the way he used all waiting time, he observed. The floor plan wide corridors, doorways with generous clearance. Elevator buttons placed lower on the panel. A ramp engineered so seamlessly into the architecture that anyone not looking for it would miss it entirely. No signs. No special access markers. Just a building designed to work for everyone without advertising the fact. Whoever had made those decisions had understood something important. Dignity doesn't need a label. Mr. Carter, Victoria Sterling's assistant, a young man named Marcus, who moved like someone who had learned to protect another person's time as if it were his own oxygen supply, appeared at the edge of the waiting area. "She's ready for you. She has a call at 10. The office at the end of the hall had a view of Lake Michigan in the distance. Victoria Sterling was on the phone when he walked in. She held up one finger without looking at him, finished a sentence that Ethan was fairly certain was in German, then set the phone down and looked at him. She was exactly 34 years old, and she looked exactly like a woman who had been fighting twice as hard as everyone else in every room she'd ever walked into, and had decided to stop finding it unusual. Her jacket was precise. Her posture was deliberate. Her wheelchair was low profile, clearly well chosen, and she sat in it the way she sat behind her desk, like she owned the space she occupied, and had no interest in apologizing for it. Her eyes were the thing he noticed most. They were the eyes of someone who had been let down enough times that she no longer registered disappointment as a surprise, but hadn't given up looking for the exception to the pattern. "Ethan Carter," she said. "Former Air Force, 8 years active, 3 deployments. Instrument rated. Type ratings on 2 business jets. Medical current." She said it flat, not as a question. She'd read all of it already. "You've been doing fractional and charter work since you separated. Why private?" "Fractional schedule doesn't work with a 6-year-old. I need predictability." "You're a single parent." "Yes." "How does that affect your availability?" "It means I need reasonable advance notice on scheduling. I understand that's standard in this role regardless. It doesn't mean I'm unavailable." She studied him for a moment. "9 pilots," she said. "I know. Do you understand why Mr. Whitmore gave me a summary?" "I'm not asking what Whitmore told you. I'm asking what you concluded." Ethan considered the question for exactly as long as it deserved. "Some of them had a problem with your disability. Some had a problem with your management style. Some of them couldn't separate those two things from each other and didn't know they couldn't." Victoria's expression held steady, but something behind her eyes moved just slightly. "And you're the CEO of an aerospace company. I'm a pilot. My job is to get you where you're going safely and on time. That's the full scope of our professional relationship. I don't carry opinions about anything beyond that." She was quiet for a moment. Not the calculating kind of quiet. The kind that happens when someone says something that lands differently than you expected. "What happened to your wife?" she asked. He hadn't expected that. "Cancer, 14 months ago." She didn't say she was sorry. He noticed that, and something about it settled in him. People said sorry when they meant they didn't know what else to say. Victoria Sterling, he was already beginning to understand, did not say things she didn't mean. "The last pilot," she said, "told me my travel schedule demonstrated poor judgment." He used the word liability. He was using professional language to describe a personal bias. That was the moment. He felt it before he could name it, the precise second when something in the room changed temperature, not warmer exactly, but different, more honest. "Tokyo," she said, picking up her pen. 3 weeks, 14 hours of flight time. Any conflicts? I'll need to arrange care for my daughter." "Of course." She wrote something. "Marcus will send you the standard contract. There's an NDA and a 60-day performance period." She looked up. "Any questions?" 1. He met her eyes. "The 9 pilots who left, did any of them give you a reason you actually believed?" Victoria Sterling looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. Ethan stood up. "Then I'll see you on the tarmac." He was halfway down the hall when he heard her voice behind him. "Mr. Carter?" He turned. She was in the office doorway, one hand resting still on the wheel of her chair, and she was looking at him with the careful, measured expression of someone making a bet they haven't fully decided to make yet. "Don't make me regret this," she said. He held her gaze from across the hallway. "I won't." He said it the way he said everything that truly mattered all the way down, no hedging, no performance. The kind of certainty that doesn't need volume or repetition. The elevator came. The doors opened. He stepped inside. Behind him, he heard no sound of retreat. Just silence, the particular stillness of someone who has stayed in the doorway, watching the elevator doors close, still watching even after the man is gone, like they're trying to read something in the air he left behind. Ethan Carter knew that kind of silence. He had stood in it himself more than once. It was the silence of a person who wants very badly to trust someone and is terrified of being wrong about it again. He understood that feeling all the way down to the marrow. The elevator descended. Outside, Chicago was brutal and gray, the lake wind finding every gap in every collar. He had $8 in his wallet. He had a daughter at home who'd asked him at breakfast, still in her pajamas, eyes serious over her cereal bowl. "Daddy, are you going to be okay today?" He pulled out his phone and typed a text to Mrs. Kaminsky. "Available to sit with Sophie over the coming weeks. Long-term work is starting up." He pressed send, slid the phone into his jacket pocket, and stood on the sidewalk for just a moment, the wind pulling at his collar, the city grinding forward all around him, and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. It wasn't loud. It wasn't certain. It didn't look anything like happiness yet. But for the first time in 14 months, what Ethan Carter felt standing on that sidewalk was not grief. It was close enough to hope that he decided to call it that. He walked to his truck. He had a daughter to pick up from school. And tomorrow, for the first time in a very long time, he had somewhere to be. 5:15 in the morning, and Ethan Carter was already awake because that was the hour his body had chosen for him years ago, and never asked permission to change. He made coffee. He made 2 lunches, one for Sophie, and one for himself because he had learned that airport food cost $11 and tasted like regret. He laid out Sophie's clothes on the chair beside her bed the way Sarah used to fold it in the order she'd put them on, and he stood there for a second in the dark, looking at the shape of his daughter under the blanket, and then he went and got dressed. At 6:40, he shook her shoulder. "Bug. Time to get up." "No." "Yes." "Daddy, it's still nighttime." "It's 6:40. Sophie pulled the blanket over her head. "That's nighttime." "Mrs. Kaminsky's coming at 7:15. She's got animal crackers." The blanket came down 2 inches. One brown eye appeared. "The good ones." "I negotiated." Sophie sat up. Ethan had been told by 3 different people in the past year that he was raising a mercenary. He had decided he was fine with that. At 7:40, he was on the road, and at 8:05 he was standing on the tarmac at Chicago Executive doing his walk-around in a wind that came straight off the lake with nothing between it and him but 400 miles of open water and bad intentions. The aircraft was a Gulfstream G55. Oh, and it was beautiful, and it was clean, and he checked every inch of it twice anyway, because a walk-around you rush is a walk-around you didn't do. At 8:40, the ground crew chief came out to meet him. His name was Danny Reyes, and he had the sun-cracked face of a man who'd spent 25 years on airport ramps and had exactly 0 interest in impressing anybody. "You the new guy, Ethan Carter. Number 10. Danny said it with a slight smile that wasn't unkind. "You know what the boys are calling this job? I imagine they've got a name for it." "The ejection seat." Ethan kept working. He ran his hand along the leading edge of the wing. "Clever. You want my advice?" "Sure. Don't help her." Ethan stopped. He turned and looked at Danny Reyes. "Say that again." Danny held up both hands. "I don't mean it how it sounds. I mean number 6 big guy, real friendly. He saw her coming across the ramp and he ran over to push her chair. Didn't ask, just grabbed the handles." "What happened?" She told him to take his hands off her chair, right there, in front of the whole crew. Danny shook his head slowly. He apologized, kept apologizing, made it worse. Wasn't flying for her by the end of the month. Ethan turned back to the wing. That's not complicated. It ain't. You don't touch a man's aircraft without permission. Same principle. Danny Reyes looked at him for a long second. Then he laughed once short and surprised, and walked away, shaking his head. And later that morning he told the fueler that number 10 might last 2 weeks instead of 1. At 9:12 the car came through the gate. Ethan didn't go to meet it. He stayed at the base of the air stair and finished his checklist, and he did not look up when he heard the doors, and he did not look up when he heard the mechanical whir of a lift descending, and he did not look up when he heard the wheels come across the tarmac. He looked up when she was 10 feet away, because that was when a person looks up. Miss Sterling, good morning. Mr. Carter. Victoria Sterling stopped at the base of the stairs and looked at him, the way a person looks at a coin flip still in the air. Weather. Ceiling's low, but it's lifting. We've got a band of light chop from about 8,000 to 16. Boston's clear. We'll be on the ground at 11:54 local, unless the arrival gets busy, and if it does, I'll tell you before it costs you anything. She raised an eyebrow 1/4 of an inch. That's more information than I usually get. You've got a call at 2. You need to know if you have time to review something in the car. That means you need to know my number, not my guess. Victoria said nothing for a moment. Marcus behind her had gone very still, the way an assistant goes still when he is trying to figure out whether he needs to start updating a job posting. There's a lift on the port side, Victoria said. The crew usually. I read the aircraft's config sheet last night. Lift's rated for 400 pounds. It's been serviced twice this year. Last inspection was in January. It cycles in about 90 seconds. He glanced at his watch. You want to board now, or you want to finish that call first? Because you were on the phone in the car and you hung up 30 feet ago, and I'd guess you weren't done. Victoria Sterling looked at him. I wasn't done, she said. Then finish. We've got a 9-minute window before I need you in a seat. And she turned her chair around, and she made the call, and Ethan went back up the stairs to the flight deck, and Marcus stood alone on the tarmac with the specific expression of a man who has just watched something happen that he has never seen happen before. They were airborne at 9:31. The first hour was uneventful. The chop hit at 11,000 exactly where the forecast said it would, and Ethan keyed the intercom before the first bump. Miss Sterling, we've got light chop for the next 4 or 5 minutes. It's forecast, it's nothing, and I'm going to ask for a block altitude to see if I can find something smoother. If your coffee's on the table, you'll want to hold it. Silence, then dry as a bone. It was on the table. Then I'm 8 seconds late and I apologize. He heard very faintly through the open cockpit door something that might have been a laugh. It was gone so fast he wasn't sure he hadn't invented it. At 10:52, over eastern Ohio, Victoria Sterling spoke without being spoken to for the first time. Mr. Carter. Ma'am. Number 4 used to announce turbulence after it happened, like he was reporting the weather rather than flying through it. That's not a report. That's an apology. What's the difference? Ethan checked his instruments. A report tells you what's coming so you can decide something. An apology tells you what already happened, so the person saying it can feel better about it. There was a pause. Yes, Victoria Sterling said quietly, and did not say anything else for the rest of the flight. They were on the ground at Boston at 11:51, 3 minutes early. Marcus checked his watch twice. The Dallas leg was Friday, and the Dallas leg was where the first crack showed. They pushed at 6 in the morning, which meant Ethan had been awake since 3:30, which meant Sophie had woken up at 3:40, because she'd heard him in the kitchen and had padded out in her socks, and stood in the doorway with her hair everywhere. Are you leaving? Yeah, Bug. Before school. He'd crouched down to her level. He always did that. Sarah had taught him that years ago. Get on their level, they're not short. They're just closer to the ground. Mrs. Kaminsky's going to walk you, and I'll be home by 7 tonight, and we'll do pancakes for dinner. Pancakes aren't dinner. Pancakes are whatever we decide they are. That's the beauty of pancakes. Sophie considered this. Then she hugged him around the neck hard, the way 6-year-olds hug, with their entire body weight and no regard for your spine. And she said into his shoulder, "Fly safe, Daddy." And Ethan Carter, 41 years old veteran of 3 deployments, held on for exactly 1 second longer than he needed to. At 6 on the dot, they were rolling, and at 8:40 over Missouri. Victoria Sterling's voice came over the intercom, and it was not the voice she'd used on Tuesday. "Mr. Carter, I need Dallas moved up." "Say again." "The Halloran meeting was 2 o'clock. It's now 11:30. I need to be on the ground with time to get downtown." Ethan looked at the clock. He looked at his fuel. He looked at the arrival plates. "I can give you 11:05 on the ground. A beat. That's an hour and 40 earlier than filed." "Yes, ma'am." "How?" "I'm going to ask for direct, and I'm going to ask for higher, and if they give me both, I'll take 20 minutes off the en route. The rest of it's on the ground. I already called ahead. Your car's repositioning now, and I'm going to put us on the runway that puts you 9 minutes closer to the gate than the one they'll assign by default." There was a silence on the intercom that lasted 4 full seconds. "You already called the car. You had a meeting move on Tuesday and a meeting move on Wednesday. Both got pushed earlier. I figured Friday had a chance." "You figured?" "It's called planning ahead, ma'am. Pilots do it professionally." He heard nothing for a moment. And then Victoria Sterling said in a tone he had not heard from her yet, flatter, quieter, and with something underneath it that had a crack running through it. "The last 9 men who sat in that seat told me my schedule was impossible." "Your schedule's not impossible," Ethan said. "It's just hard. Those aren't the same word." They were on the ground at Dallas at 11:03. Marcus stopped checking his watch after that and started checking Ethan's face instead, like he was looking for the seam. And the second week is when Sophie happened. It was a Thursday, and Mrs. Kaminsky's sister had a fall in Milwaukee, and Ethan got the call at 9 at night, and there was no version of the next 12 hours that worked. He tried 3 numbers. 2 didn't answer. 1 was out of town. He sat at his kitchen table at 10:40 at night and looked at his phone and did the math a man does when the math doesn't come out. He called Marcus at 7 the next morning. "I've got a childcare failure. I can fly, but I'd have to bring my daughter to the airport and she'd have to sit in the FBO lounge for the 90 minutes we're on the ground in Cleveland. If that's not acceptable, I understand, and I'll tell you now instead of at 8:30. There was a pause on the line, long enough for Ethan to feel his own pulse in his neck. "Hold, please," Marcus said. The hold lasted 90 seconds. Ethan spent all 90 of them looking at Sophie eating cereal at the kitchen counter, with her feet swinging 6 inches off the floor, and doing something he had gotten very good at over the past 14 months, which was staying calm on the outside while the floor went out from under him on the inside. Marcus came back on. "Miss Sterling says bring her." Ethan let out a breath. "Tell her thank you, and tell her Sophie will be in the lounge with a coloring book, and she will not be anywhere near the aircraft." "That's not what Miss Sterling said." "What did Miss Sterling say?" Marcus sounded like a man reading a sentence he did not fully understand. "She said, quote, bring her. She can sit in the cabin. It's a 900-mile flight, and there's 12 empty seats, and I'm not putting a 6-year-old in a lounge with a television playing cable news for 3 hours." Unquote. Ethan stood in his kitchen for a second. "Okay," he said. At 8:50, Sophie Carter walked onto the tarmac, holding her father's hand, wearing a purple backpack that was roughly the same size as she was, and stopped dead about 15 feet from the air stair. Victoria Sterling was already at the base of it. Ethan felt his daughter's hand tighten in his, and he braced because he knew what was coming, because he was a parent, and parents always know what's coming about 4 seconds too late to stop it. Sophie let go of his hand, walked right up to Victoria Sterling, and said at full volume, "Are your wheels fast?" Ethan closed his eyes. Marcus, standing 6 feet away, went the specific shade of gray that assistants go, and Victoria Sterling looked down at the 6-year-old standing in front of her, and something happened to her face that Ethan had not seen in 2 weeks of working for her, and would not have believed if he hadn't been standing right there. She smiled. They're pretty fast, she said. Faster than a bike. Not faster than a bike. Faster than walking. Depends who's walking. Sophie thought about that hard. Faster than my dad. Victoria Sterling looked up over Sophie's head directly at Ethan. Your dad's slow, she said. Sophie shrieked with laughter, the completely unguarded laugh of a child who has just been let in on a joke by an adult who did not talk down to her. And Ethan stood there on the tarmac at Chicago Executive with the wind pulling at his jacket and felt something in his chest turn over that he was not remotely prepared for. Sophie, he said. This is Miss Sterling. Victoria, said Victoria Sterling, who had corrected exactly no one on that point in 2 years. Sophie stuck out her hand with tremendous formality. I'm Sophie Carter. I'm 6. I'm going to be 7 in October. Victoria shook her hand. Sophie Carter, I run this company. Sophie's eyes went enormous. The whole company. The whole thing. Are you the boss of my dad? Technically. Sophie turned around and gave Ethan a look of pure delighted betrayal. Daddy, your boss is a girl. I noticed. She's the boss of you. I'm aware. Does she tell you what to do? Constantly, said Victoria Sterling. And Sophie laughed again, and Marcus made a small sound like a man witnessing a natural disaster. And Ethan Carter got his daughter buckled into seat 4A of a $14 million aircraft and went and flew it to Cleveland. The thing about Sophie Carter is that she asked questions. She asked them the way she'd always asked them, which was constantly without filter, and with the absolute confidence of a person who has never once been told a question was inappropriate. At 10,000 feet over the intercom, Ethan heard the following exchange between his daughter and the chief executive officer of a $2 billion aerospace company. Why do you use the wheels? Marcus, seated across the aisle, audibly stopped breathing. Because my legs don't work, Victoria said. Why don't they work? Because I got hurt. Did it hurt a lot? A pause. Yes. Does it hurt now? Another pause. Longer. Not the way it used to. Sophie was quiet for a second, processing. Then, my mom died. Ethan's hands went still on the yoke. He should have keyed the intercom. He should have said something. He did neither, and later he would not be able to explain why, except that some part of him understood that he was hearing something that had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with two people who had been carrying the same thing in different hands. I know, Victoria said quietly. Do you have a mom? I had one. She died when I was 9. Do you have a dad? I had one of those too. Where is he? And Ethan Carter, 31,000 feet over Indiana, heard Victoria Sterling say to his 6-year-old daughter, in a voice that had gone very soft and very steady and did not shake at all. He died in a plane crash. I was there. Were you scared? Yes. Are you scared now? There was a long silence. No, Victoria said. Your dad's flying. And Ethan Carter looked straight ahead out the windscreen at the flat gray afternoon over Indiana and had to consciously, deliberately, mechanically make himself breathe. Sophie fell asleep somewhere over Ohio with her head against the window and her purple backpack still on because she had refused to take it off because she was 6. When they got to Cleveland, Ethan came back through the cabin and found Victoria Sterling sitting exactly where she had been with a blanket from the galley draped over his daughter and a laptop open in front of her that she was clearly not looking at. She didn't say anything about the blanket. He didn't either. But at the top of the stairs on the way out, Victoria Sterling said without turning around, She's a good kid. She's her mother's kid. No, Victoria said. She's not. And she went down the lift and across the tarmac, and Ethan stood there holding a blanket and did not know for the life of him what to do with what he was feeling. By week 5, the number had changed in the hangar. Danny Reyes told him about it on a Tuesday. You know they stopped calling it the ejection seat. That right. They're calling it the Carter run now. Ethan snorted. That's worse. It's a compliment, man. It's a target. Danny stopped smiling. Yeah, he said. Yeah, it might be. And that was the first sign. Ethan didn't catch it. He would think about that later, how the warning came from a ramp mechanic in a wind-chapped jacket, and he'd walked right past it because he was in a hurry. Week 6 was London. 6 weeks in 210 flight hours, 11 states and 1 ocean. And something had settled between them into a rhythm that neither of them acknowledged out loud. She told him her schedule changes before her assistant did. He told her weather before she asked. They didn't talk about anything that wasn't operational. Except once. It was over the Atlantic at 2 a.m. Chicago time, and the cabin was dark, and Marcus was asleep, and the co-pilot was on rest, and Victoria Sterling wheeled herself to the cockpit door and stopped there. "Mr. Carter." "Ma'am." "Do you sleep?" "On rest cycles." "That's not what I asked." He looked at the instruments. Then he said, because it was 2 a.m, and there was nothing but black water underneath them. "Not much. Not since Sarah." Victoria was quiet. 14 months, he said. "You'd think it would get easier. It doesn't get easier. It gets different. It stops being a wall you walk into and starts being weather. It's just always there. You dress for it." "That's the most accurate description of grief I've ever heard," Victoria Sterling said. "It's not mine. Guy in my squadron said it. He lost a brother." "Did it help him?" "He flew for 11 more years and never missed a day." There was a long pause. The engines hummed. The black water went by underneath at 480 knots. "My board thinks I should sell," Victoria said. Ethan turned his head. "Not the whole company. The aviation division. 40% of revenue. They've been pushing it for 8 months, and I've said no 4 times. And last week Harold Vance told me in a room with 6 other people that my father would have taken the deal." "Would he have?" "No?" Her voice didn't rise. That was the thing about her Ethan had learned. It never rose. "My father built that division from nothing in a garage in Rockford in 1987. He would have died before he sold it." A pause. "Which I suppose is a poor choice of words." Ethan didn't laugh, but he didn't flinch either, and she noticed that, and she went on. "They're not going to stop Mr. Carter. So don't let them. You don't understand how boards work." "No," Ethan agreed. "But I understand how people work, and a man who says your dead father would have disagreed with you isn't making a business argument. He's making a personal one. He just doesn't want you to notice." Victoria Sterling said nothing for a long moment. 9 pilots, she said finally. "Ma'am, 9 pilots quit. You know what none of them ever did?" "What's that?" "Asked me a single question about my job." And she turned her chair around and went back into the dark cabin. Ethan flew the rest of the way to London thinking about that, and about how a person can be surrounded by 200 employees and a full board of directors and a personal assistant who worships her, and still be in every way that counts completely alone. They landed at Luton at 6:40 a.m. local. The board presentation was at 9. At 8:15, Marcus called Ethan's phone from the car. "Mr. Carter, where are you?" "Aircraft." "Why?" "Miss Sterling wants you at the presentation." Ethan blinked. "I'm the pilot." "I'm aware." "Marcus, why does she want the pilot at a board presentation?" There was a pause on the line, and when Marcus spoke, his voice had changed in a way Ethan didn't like at all. "Because Harold Vance flew in last night," Marcus said. "On a different aircraft, and nobody told her he was coming." Ethan stood in the cabin of a Gulfstream on a wet tarmac outside London at 8:15 in the morning and felt for the first time in 6 weeks the specific cold that comes over a pilot when a gauge reads something it should not read. "Marcus," he said, "how many board members are in London right now?" Another pause. "All of them," Marcus said. Ethan was in the car in 90 seconds. The Sterling Aero UK offices were in a building near Canary Wharf that had been designed by someone who believed glass was a personality. Ethan came through the lobby at 8:40 in a flight jacket and a pilot's uniform, and he did not look like he belonged, and he did not care. He found Victoria in a side room off the main conference floor. She was alone. She was looking at a printout. She did not look up when he came in. They rescheduled the vote, she said. To when? Today. 10:30. They moved it up 11 days, and they filed the notice at 4:15 yesterday afternoon Chicago time, which is 11:15 at night here, which is a legal notice period of exactly the length required by the bylaws, and not 1 minute more. Ethan closed the door behind him. They knew I'd be in the air, Victoria said, still not looking up. 8 hours over the Atlantic. No secure line, no counsel. They filed it while I was flying. Victoria. It was the first time he had used her name. She looked up. Her eyes were dry. That was the part that hit him. They were completely perfectly dry, and that was so much worse than crying that Ethan felt something in his chest physically hurt. It's a vote of no confidence, she said. In my leadership, Vance has been building it for 8 months. He needs 6 votes. He has 5. Who's the 6th? Nobody. That's the point. He doesn't have a 6th yet. She set the printout down on the table with tremendous care, the way a person handles an object they very much want to throw. So he needs a reason, something recent, something dramatic, something that makes the 6th vote easy. Ethan stood very still. What kind of reason? He said, and Victoria Sterling looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time since he'd walked into her office 6 weeks ago and told her his job was to get her where she was going, and said, "He needs something to go wrong on my aircraft, Mr. Carter." The room was silent. Somewhere out in the hallway, someone laughed at something. A door closed. The ordinary noise of an ordinary Thursday morning in an office building in London went on happening on the other side of the wall. "Tokyo's in 9 days," Ethan said slowly. "Yes. 14 hours, over water, in a corridor with no good divert options for 4 hours of it." "Yes. And if anything goes wrong on that flight, anything, whether a warning light, a diversion, a delay that makes you miss the meeting, he gets his 6th vote." "Yes." Ethan Carter looked at the woman in front of him. 8:47 in the morning, London 6 weeks into a job that 9 men had refused, and he understood all at once and completely that he had not been hired to fly an airplane. "Then nothing's going to go wrong," he said. Victoria's mouth moved. It wasn't a smile. "You can't promise that." "No," Ethan agreed. "But I can promise that if something does, it won't be because of me." And out in the hall at 8:49 a voice said, Victoria's name, loud, cheerful, and entirely too pleased with itself, and Ethan Carter turned toward the door and got his first look at Harold Vance. Harold Vance was 63 years old, and he came through the door of that side room like a man walking into a party he'd thrown for himself. "Victoria, there she is." "Harold, I hope you slept on the flight. Long one." He said it warmly. That was the thing Ethan noticed first, standing off to the side in a flight jacket that made him look like exactly what he was, which was staff. Vance said everything warmly. "Terrible timing on the notice, I know. Absolutely terrible. Legal insisted. You know how they are. Legal insisted you file at 11:15 at night London time while I was over the Atlantic. Legal insisted we file within the window." Vance spread his hands. "I don't write the bylaws, Victoria. Your father wrote the bylaws." And there it was, 8:50 in the morning, and he'd already used the dead man. Ethan watched Victoria's hands on the arms of her chair. They did not move. Nothing about her moved. But something behind her eyes went a long way down and locked itself in. 10:30, she said. 10:30. Vance smiled. Then he looked over and he saw Ethan, and his face did something interesting. It didn't drop. It reorganized. "I'm sorry. Are we in a meeting I didn't realize? This is Mr. Carter, my pilot." "Your pilot?" Vance's eyebrows went up about a millimeter. "In a strategy room." "He's not in a strategy room. He's in a room. You came into it." Vance laughed. He actually laughed and clapped his hands together once and said, "That's the Sterling in you, never changes." And then to Ethan with his hand out. "Harold Vance, board 22 years. You must be the one who's lasted." Ethan shook his hand. It was a good handshake. That was the worst part. Ethan Carter. 10 pilots, Mr. Carter. You know that 10 in 14 months. 9, Ethan said. Vance blinked. I'm sorry. 9 pilots. I'm the 10th. 9 left. Ethan let go of his hand. Sir? There was about a second and a half of silence in that room where Harold Vance recalculated something, and Ethan watched him do it, and Victoria watched Ethan watch him do it. And then Vance smiled bigger than before and said, Well, good man. Attention to detail. That's what we want in a cockpit. And he tapped the door frame twice on his way out and said, 10:30 Victoria, chin up, and was gone. The door clicked. Chin up, Ethan repeated. He says that. To you. He says it to everyone. Does he? Ethan looked at the closed door. 22 years on the board, and he doesn't know how many pilots have quit on you. But he knows the exact filing deadline in the bylaws to the minute. Victoria didn't answer. Ma'am, Ethan said, that man's not sloppy. He wants you to think he's sloppy. At 9:04, Marcus knocked and came in with 2 things of coffee for Victoria and a face that had gone the color of drywall. They added an item to the agenda. What item? Operational risk review. Marcus swallowed. Miss Sterling, they want to discuss the aviation department. The coffee sat on the table untouched. The aviation department, Victoria said. Executive transport specifically. There's a... Marcus checked the tablet, and Ethan could see his hands weren't steady. There's an attachment, a risk memo, 12 pages. It was uploaded to the board portal at 4:19 yesterday afternoon. 4 minutes after the notice. Yes, ma'am. Read me the header. Marcus's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Ethan once quickly, and Ethan understood right then that whatever was on that tablet was going to be bad in a specific way. Marcus, Victoria said. Read it. He read it. Assessment of personal and institutional risk factors in executive air travel, with particular reference to medical contingency, egress capability, and command continuity. Nobody said anything. Egress capability, Victoria repeated. Yes, ma'am. That's a fire word, Ethan said quietly. That's the word you use when you want the room to picture an aircraft on fire, and somebody who can't get out of it. Victoria's hands were flat on the arms of her chair. She looked at the table for 4 full seconds. Then she said, Marcus, get me Ellen Park, now, not her assistant, her. She's in Chicago, it's 3 in the wee, wake her. At 9:22, Ellen Park was on speaker from a bedroom in Winnetka. She was Sterling Aero's general counsel, and she'd been Richard Sterling's general counsel before that, and she sounded like she'd been awake for a while already. I saw it at midnight, she said. I've been reading it since. Why didn't you call me? You were over the Atlantic Victoria. There's no secure line. You know that. A pause. That's why they did it then. How bad? It's careful. Ellen exhaled. That's what worries me. There's not one sentence in 12 pages you could put in front of a jury. It never says the word disability. It never says the word wheelchair. It says medical contingency. It says reduced independent mobility profile. It says insurer sensitivity. Insurer sensitivity, Victoria said. They got a broker's letter, page 9. An aviation underwriter says, and I'm quoting because you need the exact words, that executive transport risk premiums are sensitive to command continuity factors. What does that mean? Ethan said. There was a pause on the line. Who's that, my pilot? Another pause longer. Your pilot is in the room. Yes. Victoria. Ellen, what does it mean? Ellen Park sighed, and when she spoke again, she'd chosen to answer him instead. It means nothing, Mr. Carter. It's a letter from a broker saying that in the abstract, insurers care about who's on board and whether they can be evacuated. It's true of every executive aircraft on Earth. It doesn't name Victoria. It doesn't have to. It's on page 9 of a memo about her. So it's a picture, Ethan said. It's a picture, Ellen agreed. They're not going to argue she can't do the job. They're going to put 12 pages of neutral language in front of 6 people and let those 6 people build the argument in their own heads. And then Vance is going to look sad about it. At 9:31, Ellen Park said the thing that changed the shape of the morning. "Victoria, don't go in there swinging." "Excuse me. They want you angry. That memo is engineered to make you angry. And if you walk in there and call it what it is, which is discrimination, which is exactly what it is, you hand them the narrative. Emotional. Reactive. Can't take criticism. That's the second half of the play. So I sit there. You sit there and you let them table it, and you say 4 words, "I'll respond in writing." And then you get on a plane, and you go to Tokyo, and you close the Nakamura contract because $140 million in signed revenue is the only thing on earth that outvotes a memo. Silence. "Victoria," Ellen said, "do you hear me?" "I hear you." "Say it back." "I'll respond in writing." "Good." A beat. "And Victoria, do not be late to Tokyo." The call ended. At 9:34, nobody in the room said anything for a while. Then Victoria said without looking up, "Mr. Carter, 9 days. Tokyo." "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me right now honestly, if there is any weather, any maintenance, any crew rest problem, any single thing between here and the 14th of the month that could make me late." Ethan thought about it. He didn't rush it. That was the thing Victoria had started to notice about him weeks ago, and had never mentioned when you asked Ethan Carter a hard question. He actually stopped and considered it, and there was something almost unbearable about being taken that seriously. "Weather's a coin flip that far out," he said. "Maintenance is the aircraft, crew rest is math, and I'll manage it. And if the coin comes up wrong, then I fly it wrong side up and get you there anyway." "That's not an answer." "No, ma'am." Ethan agreed. "It's a commitment. Those aren't the same word either." At 10:30 they wheeled into the boardroom, and at 11:40 they came out, and Ethan Carter, who had spent that hour and 10 minutes standing in a hallway outside a closed door, with his hands folded, which was the longest hour and 10 minutes he had spent since a hospital waiting room 14 months earlier, watched the door open, and watched Victoria Sterling come through it with her chin exactly level, and her expression exactly neutral, and knew instantly that she had done it. "Well?" "Tabled," she said. "Pending my written response." "You said the 4 words." "I said the 4 words." She was 3 feet past him when he said, "Ma'am." She stopped. "That was the hardest thing I've watched anybody do in a long time," Ethan said. "And I couldn't even see it." Victoria Sterling did not turn around, but she sat there for a second in the middle of a hallway in Canary Wharf, and Ethan saw her shoulders drop about half an inch, and that was all. And then she was moving again, and Marcus was reading her the afternoon, and the day went on. They flew home Friday. Sophie had a soccer game Saturday. Ethan stood on a sideline in a windbreaker with 40 other parents and watched his daughter chase a ball with the tactical sophistication of a golden retriever and score on her own team's goal and celebrate anyway. And he laughed so hard he had to put his hand on his knee. On the drive home she said, "Daddy, is Victoria coming to my birthday?" He nearly went through a red light. Bug. "Victoria's my boss." So that's not really how it works. Why? And Ethan Carter opened his mouth to explain the professional boundaries of an executive-pilot relationship to a 6-year-old, and discovered that he did not have a single sentence that would survive contact with her. "I'll ask," he said. "Okay." Sophie said satisfied, and went back to her juice box, because in her world the matter was now settled, and Ethan drove the rest of the way home, wondering when exactly the ground had shifted under him, and why he hadn't felt it happen. Monday, 4 days out from Tokyo. Danny Reyes called him at 6 in the morning. "You need to come down here." "Danny, it's 6. "I know what time it is. Come down here." Ethan was at the hangar at 6:40. Danny took him around the back of the aircraft, up the stairs of a maintenance stand, and pointed. "Left engine. Number 2. Look at the pylon." Ethan looked. "It's clean. It's new." Ethan went still. Somebody replaced the fire detect loop on number 2, Danny said. Saturday. There's a work order. It's signed. It's legitimate. It's in the system. So the loop wasn't due for 11 months, nobody wrote a discrepancy, and the tech who signed it isn't on our contract. Ethan's mouth went dry. Who authorized it? That's the thing. Danny handed him a printout, and his hand was shaking a little, and Danny Reyes had been on ramps for 25 years, and his hands did not shake. It came down through corporate maintenance oversight, under a budget line I've never seen before. Approved 8 days ago. 8 days ago is, yeah, Danny said. The day before they filed the notice. Ethan stood on a maintenance stand at 6:52 in the morning and felt his heartbeat somewhere up in his throat. Danny, he said carefully, is the aircraft airworthy? That's the part that's going to keep you up. Danny wiped his mouth. Yeah, it's airworthy. Everything checks. The work's good, the parts are right, the signatures are right. There is not one thing I can point at and say this is wrong. Then why'd you call me at 6 in the morning? Danny looked at him. Because in 25 years, he said, nobody has ever done unscheduled maintenance on an airplane I take care of without telling me first. Nobody. And I don't know what it means. But I know what it feels like. Ethan looked at the engine for a long time. Danny, he said, from now until we're back from Tokyo, nobody touches this aircraft unless you or I are standing there. That's not really how... Nobody, Ethan said. And Danny Reyes, who had not once in 25 years taken an order from a pilot about how to run his ramp, said, yeah, okay. Ethan didn't tell Victoria. He thought about it for 2 days, and he didn't tell her, and he would go over that decision in his head for a long time afterward, and he would never be sure he'd been right. Because what would he have said? Ma'am, somebody replaced a part that didn't need replacing and did the work correctly. There was no accusation in that. There was no evidence in that. There was a feeling in the stomach of a ramp mechanic, and Ethan Carter had spent 8 years in a military where a feeling in the stomach was the least admissible thing on earth and also the thing that kept you alive. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He rebuilt the flight. Tuesday night he was at the kitchen table until 1 in the morning with charts spread out and a laptop and a legal pad. Wednesday night same. Thursday, he called the Anchorage station manager, a man he'd never met, and talked for 40 minutes about a runway he hoped he would never need. He replanned the Pacific crossing 3 separate ways. He built a fuel load that gave him 4,000 pounds more than he needed, and made the numbers work anyway. He memorized every divert field between Chicago and Tokyo, like he was going to be quizzed, because in a very real way, he was. Sophie found him at the table at midnight on Thursday. Daddy? Hey, Bug. Go back to bed. She didn't. She climbed into the chair next to him and looked at the charts. Is that Tokyo? That's the whole ocean. That's a lot of ocean. It is. Sophie put her chin on the table, which put her eyes at chart level, and studied it with total seriousness. Daddy, she said, are you scared? Ethan set down his pen. He could have said no. That's what you say. That's the whole job. You say no. You say everything's fine. You keep the floor under them. A little, he said. Sophie nodded slowly like this was reasonable. Victoria said she's not scared when you're flying. Ethan's throat closed. She said that on the plane, when I asked. Sophie yawned enormously. So you don't have to be scared. She's not scared, so you don't have to be. And she slid off the chair and padded back down the hall, and Ethan Carter sat alone at his kitchen table at midnight with a chart of the Pacific Ocean in front of him and put his face in his hands for about 10 seconds. Then he picked the pen back up. They pushed for Tokyo at 11:02 on Saturday morning. The forecast was decent, not clean. There was a system building over the northern Pacific that the models disagreed about, which is the worst thing a system can do, but decent. Ethan briefed it to Victoria on the tarmac, exactly the way he'd briefed everything for 9 weeks. There's weather at the back half. Models are split. The European model has it moving north and out of our way. The American model has it sitting on the route. I don't believe either one of them yet. What do you believe? I believe I put an extra 4,000 pounds of fuel on, and I'll know more in 6 hours. Victoria looked at the aircraft, then at him. Mr. Carter, if I'm not in that room Monday at 9 in the morning, Nakamura signs with Bombardier and Harold Vance gets his 6th vote by Thursday. I'm aware. Then say the thing pilots say. What thing? The thing where you tell me the airplane doesn't care about my board. Ethan almost smiled. The airplane doesn't care about your board, ma'am. That's the best news you've had all month. They were wheels up at 11:09. The first 8 hours were nothing. That's how it always is. 8 hours of black water and quiet radios and coffee that gets progressively worse. And Ethan flew, and Ethan's first officer, a solid, unremarkable man named Pete Kowalski, flew, and they traded rest cycles and watched the fuel burn and said maybe 40 words to each other. At hour 9, the models stopped disagreeing. Oh, that's not great, Kowalski said. Ethan looked at the uplinked weather and did not say anything for a moment. The system hadn't moved north. It hadn't sat still either. It had deepened, and it had come south, and it was now squarely across the route with tops that the satellite estimate put well above anything the Gulf Stream could climb over. Options, Kowalski said. North of it costs us 400 miles. Fuel. Ethan ran it. He ran it twice because he'd built 4,000 extra pounds into the load 9 days ago at a kitchen table in Chicago at 1 in the morning while his daughter slept down the hall. Fuel's there, he said. Kowalski whistled. You planned this. I planned something. At 11:40 at night, Chicago time, Ethan keyed the intercom. Miss Sterling? Go ahead. Oh, the weather did the bad thing. It's on our route and I'm not going through it. I'm going north around. It costs us about 50 minutes, and we have the fuel. You'll be on the ground in Tokyo at 8:05 Monday morning local instead of 7:15. That's 55 minutes to your meeting instead of an hour 45. There was a pause. Is 55 minutes enough? Marcus says the hotel is 19 minutes from the airport at that hour, and the meeting is in the hotel. Another pause. You asked Marcus, Victoria said. I asked Marcus in Chicago on Wednesday, ma'am, because I wanted to know how much I could afford to lose before I had to start making bad decisions. Silence on the intercom, long enough that Kowalski glanced over. Fly north, Victoria said. They flew north, and at hour 11 and 40 minutes at 2:48 in the morning, Chicago time over the Kamchatka corridor, with nothing under them but 4,000 feet of cloud and several miles of very cold water, the master caution lit up. Kowalski said a word. Ethan's hand was already on the panel. Number 2, he said. Fire loop. And every single thing in Ethan Carter's body went cold at once, because he was looking at a warning light on a fire detect loop that some technician nobody knew had replaced 8 days before a board vote. Fire? Kowalski's voice was tight. Do we have a fire? Negative fire. Ethan's hands were moving fast and exact, and his voice had gone somewhere flat and far away, the voice he hadn't used since a night over Kandahar in 2011. No fire indication. That's a loop fault. That's the detector, not the engine. How do you know? Because the engine's fine. Ethan's eyes went across the gauges in one sweep. N1's good. N2's good. EGT's normal. Oil pressure normal. Vibration normal. There is nothing wrong with that engine. What's wrong is the thing that tells us if something's wrong with that engine. So we've got an engine we can't monitor. We've got an engine we can't monitor, Ethan agreed. Over the Pacific, at 3 in the morning. The checklist said what the checklist said. Kowalski read it out loud, and his voice only shook a little on the second line. Nearest suitable is Petropavlovsk, Kowalski said. 210 miles. Russia. Russia. How's the weather in Petropavlovsk? Kowalski pulled it. Then he said quietly, 800 overcast, 3/4 of a mile blowing snow. That's not suitable. That's just close. Anchorage is 940. And there it was. Ethan Carter sat in the left seat of a Gulfstream at 3 in the morning over the northern Pacific and understood the shape of the thing completely. If he turned for Anchorage, which was the conservative call, which was the call that every Czech airman on Earth would nod at, which was the call that no investigator would ever question. Victoria Sterling would land in Alaska at 6 in the morning, and Nakamura would sign with Bombardier at 9, and Harold Vance would have his 6th vote by Thursday, and the memo about egress capability would be entered into the minutes of a company her father built in a garage in Rockford in 1987. And if he pressed on to Tokyo with an unmonitored engine over water and anything at all went wrong, anything, then a woman who had already survived one plane crash would be in a second one, and it would be his fault, and Sophie Carter would grow up knowing what her father had traded and what he'd traded it for. Kowalski said, "Ethan." Ethan didn't answer. "Ethan, it's your call. But it's not a hard one." "No," Ethan said. "It's not." He keyed the intercom. "Miss Sterling, I need you to hear this exactly as I say it, and I need you not to fill in any blanks." 3 seconds. Then her voice absolutely level. "Go ahead." "We have a fault on a fire detection loop on the number 2 engine. There is no fire. There has never been a fire. The engine is running normally, and every parameter on it is where it should be. What has failed is the sensor that would tell me if something did go wrong, so I am flying an engine I cannot monitor." Silence. "Say the rest," Victoria said. "The rest is that I have 2 options. I can divert to Anchorage, which is 940 miles behind us, and which has a runway and a hangar and a maintenance base, and you will not be in Tokyo Monday. Or I can continue to Tokyo, which is 3 hours ahead over water with an engine I can't monitor, and I would be making that decision for commercial reasons." Another silence. Longer. "And what's your recommendation, Mr. Carter?" "Anchorage." Why? And Ethan Carter, 41 years old. 3 deployments, 11,000 hours, said the truest sentence of his professional life at 3 in the morning over the Pacific Ocean. "Because I don't get to gamble with you, ma'am. Not on a schedule, not on a contract, not on a vote. That's not what you hired me for, and it's not what I'd tell my daughter I did." Nothing came back for a long moment. Then Victoria Sterling said, "Go to Anchorage." "Ma'am." "Mr. Carter?" Her voice didn't rise. It never rose. "Go to Anchorage. That's not me being brave. That's me agreeing with my pilot, which is the entire reason I hired one." They turned at 3:04 in the morning. The turn took 90 seconds, and Ethan flew it perfectly, and Kowalski called Anchorage, and the flight attendant went back and sat with Victoria for the whole descent, even though Victoria didn't need anyone to sit with her. And at 4:52 in the morning, Ethan Carter put $14 million of aircraft and 1 chief executive officer down on runway 7, right at Ted Stevens Anchorage International, on the numbers, in a 15-knot crosswind so smoothly that the flight attendant said afterward she wasn't sure they'd landed. The engine spooled down. The airplane sat there. And Ethan Carter put both hands flat on his thighs and let out a breath he'd been holding for 106 minutes. Kowalski was shaking. Just his left hand. He put it under his leg. "That was a loop fault," Kowalski said. "Yeah." "That was Ethan, that was just a loop fault. We do those in the sim." "Yeah." "So why do I feel like that?" Ethan looked out the windscreen at an Alaskan runway at 5 in the morning. "Because it wasn't the loop," he said. At 5:40 in the morning, Anchorage time, Ethan came down the air stair, and Danny Rea's voice was in his ear on a phone with a terrible connection. "Say it again," Ethan said. "I said I pulled the paperwork on that loop the second you called me from the air." Danny's voice was fast, too fast. "The part number's right. The install's right. The signature's right." "Then what?" "The tech man." Danny took a breath. "I ran him down. Took me an hour. He's a contract A&P out of a shop in Wheeling. Legit license, clean record, everything." "Danny." "He's been on the payroll of a consulting firm for 11 months. Retainer. $2,200 a month." Ethan stopped walking. "What consulting firm?" "Meridian Strategic Advisors." Danny's voice cracked. "Ethan? Ethan, I looked them up. It's 3 guys and a P.O. box in Schaumburg." "Who owns it?" That's what took me the hour, Danny said. It's a holding entity, 2 layers, and the second layer files with the state of Delaware. Danny, who owns it? There was a silence on a bad phone line from a hangar in Chicago to a tarmac in Anchorage at 5:41 in the morning. Vance's son-in-law, Danny said. Ethan Carter stood absolutely still on a cold ramp in Alaska. Danny listened to me very carefully. Is the work bad? That's what I'm telling you. Danny's voice went up. The work is perfect. It's the best loop install I've ever seen. The kid did it by the book, torqued to spec. He even upgraded the clamp hardware. It is a better installation than the one that came out of the factory. Then I don't understand. Neither did I, Danny said. For 2 days I didn't. And then you called me from the middle of the ocean and told me you had a loop fault, and Ethan, a loop fault doesn't come from a bad install. Then where does it come from? It comes from a sensitive one, Danny said. You install a fire loop that's too tight, too well clamped, too rigid, it doesn't fail. It doesn't break. It just gets touchy. It reads thermal expansion as a fault. It throws a caution on a long flight over water at 3 in the morning when the airframe's been cold-soaked for 11 hours. Ethan closed his eyes. It's not sabotage, he said slowly. It's an event. It's an event, Danny said. It was never going to crash the airplane. It was going to scare the airplane. It was going to put a warning light in front of a pilot at the worst possible hour and see what he did with it, and whatever he did with it, divert delay. Miss the meeting. Declare an emergency. Put it in a logbook. That's the incident. That's the thing. That's 12 pages of a memo about egress capability with an actual date on it. Ethan looked back at the aircraft, at Victoria Sterling coming down the lift in the dark at 5:43 in the morning in Anchorage, Alaska, 940 miles from where she was supposed to be, with $140 million walking out the door in 3 hours and a board meeting on Thursday, and no way on earth to prove that any of it had been done to her on purpose. Danny, Ethan said, how many people know what you just told me? You, me. Keep it that way. He hung up. He walked across the ramp. Victoria was at the bottom of the lift and Marcus was talking into a phone very fast, and Ethan stopped in front of her, and for about 4 seconds, neither of them said anything. You made the right call, Victoria said. Ma'am? You made the right call, Mr. Carter, and it cost me $140 million and probably my company, and it was still the right call, and I need you to hear me say that once, so you never wonder about it. Ethan looked at her, and then he did the thing he had promised himself 9 weeks ago in a glass office in Chicago that he would never do. He crossed the line. It wasn't an accident, he said. Victoria Sterling went very, very still. What did you say? The loop that faulted. Ethan crouched down because that was what you did, because Sarah had taught him that years ago, and it had never once been about height. It was replaced 8 days ago. It wasn't due for 11 months. Nobody wrote it up. The work order came down through a corporate budget line Danny Reyes has never seen in 25 years. That's not... The tech who signed it is on a $2,200 a month retainer from a consulting firm with a P.O. box in Schaumburg. Ethan didn't blink. The firm's owned by a holding entity. The holding entity files in Delaware. The name on the filing is Harold Vance's son-in-law. Marcus stopped talking into his phone. The ramp was very quiet. Victoria Sterling did not move. She did not breathe as far as Ethan could tell. And then in a voice that was not level for the first time in 9 weeks, she said, "Say the rest." The work was perfect, Ethan said. That's the point. He didn't break it. He built it too well. He made it sensitive. It was never going to bring the airplane down, ma'am. It was going to throw one caution light at 3 in the morning over the Pacific, and whatever the pilot did next was going to end up in a logbook with a date on it, and that logbook entry was going to be page 13 of that memo. Victoria Sterling looked at him. You knew, she said. I didn't know. You knew something. That's why the extra fuel. That's why you called Anchorage 9 days ago. That's why you had a station manager's cell phone number in a town you've never landed in. Ethan didn't answer. How long have you known? Monday, he said. 6 days. Her voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was the worst part. You've known for 6 days, and you put me on that airplane anyway, and you didn't tell me. Yes, ma'am. Why? And Ethan Carter, kneeling on a freezing ramp in Anchorage, Alaska, at 5:47 in the morning, with everything he had built over 9 weeks balanced on the next sentence, told her the truth. Because if I'd told you Monday, he said, you'd have canceled Tokyo. And that's exactly what they wanted. They didn't need the airplane to fail, ma'am. They needed you to stop getting on it. Victoria Sterling stared at him. And somewhere behind them, at 5:48 in the morning, Marcus's phone lit up in his hand, and he looked down at it, and every drop of color went out of his face. Miss Sterling, he said. Not now. Miss Sterling. Marcus's voice cracked straight down the middle. It's Chicago. It's Ellen Park. Marcus? They filed a complaint, Marcus said. 20 minutes ago, with the FAA. Ethan stood up slowly. Against who? He said. Marcus looked at him, and his hand was shaking so hard he could barely hold the phone. You, he said. Ethan Carter did not move for 3 full seconds. Say that again, he said. The complaint's against you. Marcus was reading off the phone, and his voice kept sliding sideways. Filed at 9:06 Chicago time. Anonymous safety report. It alleges, hold on, it alleges the pilot in command departed Chicago with knowledge of an unresolved maintenance discrepancy on the number 2 engine, and continued a transoceanic flight into known adverse weather. That's not what happened. I know it's not. Marcus, that is the opposite of what happened. I diverted 900 miles to a maintenance base to avoid exactly what they're accusing me of. I know. Then who filed it at 9:06 Chicago time? Ethan's voice went up for the first time in 9 weeks, and Marcus actually stepped back. Marcus, we landed at 4:52. That's 8:52 Chicago. Somebody filed a 1,400-word safety complaint about a diversion 14 minutes after the wheels touched. Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Victoria said very quietly, They wrote it before we landed? They wrote it Tuesday, Ethan said. They wrote it Tuesday, and they left a blank where the outcome goes. At 5:52 in the morning in Anchorage, Alaska, Ellen Park's voice came out of the speaker on Marcus's phone, and it sounded like a woman who had done the math already and hated it. Victoria, is he standing there? He's standing here. Mr. Carter, don't say anything to anyone. Not the FSDO, not the operator safety officer, not a co-worker, not your first officer, and God help you, not a reporter. I want to answer it. I know you do. That's why I'm telling you not to. Miss Park, the flight data is going to show. The flight data is going to show exactly what you say it shows, Ellen cut in. And it's going to take 11 weeks to say it. That's the point, Mr. Carter. Nobody thinks you're going to lose this. They think you're going to be pending for 11 weeks. Ethan went quiet. You're a contractor, Ellen said. You fly under Sterling's operating certificate. The second there's an open safety complaint on the pilot in command, the insurer's position changes and the operator's risk committee has a written obligation to review the assignment. Which means Harold Vance doesn't have to fire you. He just has to ask a question in a room and let the process do it. So they ground me. They don't ground you. They temporarily reassign pending resolution. Just has to ask a question in a room and let the process do it. So they ground me. They don't ground you. They temporarily reassign pending resolution. It's 4 words in a memo. A pause. And then Victoria has no pilot. Again. For the 10th time. And there it was, laid out flat on a cold ramp at 5:54 in the morning, and Ethan Carter understood the entire architecture of the thing at once, and felt something in him go very cold and very still. It was never the airplane, he said. No? Ellen said. It was never about crashing anything. It was about the 10th pilot. Mr. Carter, that memo says command continuity. Ethan's voice was flat now. 12 pages. Egress capability. Medical contingency. Command continuity. And the last 4 pages are going to be a list, aren't they? 9 names and then mine. 9 pilots who quit and 1 who got a complaint filed on him. And Vance stands up in front of 6 people and says sadly that he's not questioning anyone's ability. He's just noting that in 14 months, the CEO's aircraft has been through 10 pilots, and doesn't that suggest something structural? Silence on the line from Winnetka. "Ms. Park," Ethan said, "am I wrong?" "No," Ellen Park said. "You're not wrong. That's page 14. It's a table." Victoria Sterling had not said a word in 90 seconds. Ethan looked at her. Her hands were on the arms of her chair, and they were not moving, and her face was doing absolutely nothing. And he had learned by now that this was the single most dangerous thing about her, because it meant she had gone somewhere very far down and was reading the whole board. "Victoria," he said. "Ellen," she said. "How long have you known about the table?" A pause. "Since midnight London time." "You didn't tell me. I told you to say 4 words and go to Tokyo. That was my advice with the table in it. And now I'm in Anchorage." "Yes. With no contract, no pilot in 11 weeks, a board vote Thursday, and $140 million signing with Bombardier at 9 o'clock this morning." "Yes," Ellen Park said. Victoria Sterling looked out across a ramp in Alaska at 5:57 in the morning. "Marcus," she said. "What time is it in Tokyo?" Marcus checked. 10:57 at night, Sunday. "Get me Nakamura." Marcus's face went blank. "Miss Sterling, it's 11 at night." "Get me Nakamura." Ma'am, he's 71 years old. He's at home. We do not have his Marcus?" Victoria turned her head and looked at her assistant, and Marcus stopped talking mid-word. 2 years ago, that man sat in my hospital room in Denver for 40 minutes and did not say one word about my legs. He talked about my father. He's the only one who did. I have his home number in my phone under his wife's name because she gave it to me. A beat. "Get me Nakamura." At 6:04 in this morning. Anchorage time 11:04 at night in Tokyo, a 71-year-old man picked up a phone in a house in Setagaya. Victoria spoke Japanese for 90 seconds. Then she switched, and Ethan understood later that she'd done it on purpose because she wanted him to hear it. "Kenji-san, I'm not in Tokyo. I'm in Alaska. My aircraft had a fault over the Pacific, and my pilot brought us down. I will not be in your conference room at 9 in the morning." Ethan couldn't hear the other side. He watched her face instead. "No," Victoria said. "No, I'm not asking you to move the meeting." Marcus made a strangled noise. "I'm asking you to keep it," Victoria said. "At 9, exactly as scheduled. And I'm asking you to let my pilot brief your engineers on why he turned around." Ethan's head came up. "Because you're not buying a contract from me, Kenji-san. You're buying 11 years of aviation systems from a company you've done business with since my father was alive. And in about 4 days, 6 people are going to vote on whether I'm fit to run it, and the argument they're making is that when something goes wrong on my aircraft, I'm the reason." Her voice did not rise. It never rose. "Something went wrong on my aircraft 8 hours ago. And I would like your engineers, the best avionics people in Asia, to hear exactly what happened and decide for themselves whose judgment they're buying." There was a very long silence on the line. Then a man in Setagaya said something, and Victoria Sterling closed her eyes for 1 full second. "Thank you," she said. She hung up. "Well," Marcus said. 9 o'clock, Victoria said. "Video. And he's putting his chief engineer and his head of procurement in the room." Marcus stared. That's good. That's not why he said yes," Victoria said. "Then why?" Victoria Sterling looked at Ethan Carter across a ramp in Anchorage. "He said, your father would have gone to Alaska too." Nobody said anything. And Ethan turned away toward the aircraft because he had exactly 2 seconds to get his face under control, and he did not want to spend them in front of anyone. At 6:40 in the morning, Ethan called home. It rang 4 times. Mrs. Kaminsky answered, and Ethan heard cartoons, and something in his chest unclenched a quarter turn. "She's fine," Mrs. Kaminsky said before he asked. "She's eating cereal on the couch, which I know you don't allow, but I allowed it." "Thank you." "Ethan." A pause. "There was a man here." Everything in him went to ice. "What?" "Last night, around 8, rang the bell, said he was from the company, very polite, nice coat." "Did you let him in?" "Do I look like I let people in?" Mrs. Kaminsky said. "I told him you were flying. He said he knew. He said he just wanted to leave a card." A rustle. "It's on your counter." "Read it to me." "It says Meridian Strategic Advisors, and then a name, and then he wrote on the back he wrote, 'Mr. Carter, when you get home I'd like 15 minutes. There's no downside for you here." Ethan stood on a ramp in Alaska and felt something he had not felt in 14 months, which was rage. Clean cold. Structural rage, the kind that doesn't make you loud, the kind that makes you extremely precise. "Mrs. Kaminsky," he said, "is the deadbolt on?" "Ethan, is the deadbolt on?" "It's on," she said quietly. "It's been on since he left." "Don't answer the door until I'm home." "Sophie has soccer at 11. Then take her to soccer and come straight back and don't answer the door." He hung up. He stood there for a second. Then Ethan Carter walked back across the ramp, and Victoria saw his face, and she said immediately, "What?" "They went to my house," Ethan said, "at 9 o'clock Tokyo time. 1 in the afternoon. Sunday in Anchorage, though nobody in that FBO conference room was thinking in Anchorage time anymore." Ethan Carter sat down in front of a laptop in a borrowed room with a bad chair and briefed 7 Japanese engineers on the worst 106 minutes of his professional life. He did it flat, no adjectives. That was the only way he knew how. At 02:48 Chicago time at flight level 410, we received a master caution on the number 2 engine fire detection loop. There was no fire indication. All engine parameters were nominal. N1, N2E, GT oil pressure vibration nominal, and they stayed nominal for the remainder of the flight. He talked for 19 minutes. He put the fuel numbers up. He put the weather up. He put the divert analysis up. Petropavlovsk at 210 miles with 800 overcast and blowing snow anchorage at 940, with a maintenance base and a runway you could land a space shuttle on. "I want to be clear on one point," he said. Petropavlovsk was closer. Petropavlovsk would have gotten us on the ground an hour and 40 minutes sooner. Petropavlovsk was also 3/4 of a mile visibility and blowing snow at an airfield I have never operated into with an engine I could not monitor. Close is not the same as suitable. I went to Anchorage. The chief engineer, a small man named Ito with reading glasses pushed up on his head, said in careful English, "Captain, the fuel." "Sir." "You had fuel for 940 miles after you had already flown 400 miles of a northern deviation you did not plan." "Yes, sir." "Why?" And Ethan Carter, in a borrowed conference room in Alaska, said the thing that broke it open. "Because 9 days ago I sat at my kitchen table and I could not make the flight work with legal fuel," he said. "Legal is legal. Legal would have been fine. But legal assumed the weather went where the models said it would go, and legal assumed the airplane did what the airplane was supposed to do, and I had a feeling in my stomach I could not defend to anybody. So I put 4,000 extra pounds on, and I ate the performance penalty, and I did not tell anyone why, because I didn't have a why. I had a feeling." Silence in Tokyo. "Captain Carter," Ito said, "in our company we have a word for this." "Sir?" Ito said a word in Japanese. Then he said, "It does not translate. The closest is the pilot who packs for the flight he hopes he does not take." Ethan didn't say anything. Ito took his glasses off his head and put them on the table and looked directly at the camera. "Miss Sterling," he said, "is this man your pilot, or is he your employee?" Victoria Sterling, off to the side of the frame, said, "He's my pilot." "Then I have one question for the room." Ito looked around at his own people. "Sterling Aero has offered us a fire detection architecture for the Nakamura 400 series. In 4 days, 6 people will vote on whether the woman who signed that offer is capable of running the company that builds it. He put his glasses back on. This morning, that architecture threw a false caution over the Pacific Ocean at 3 o'clock in the morning, and a pilot who could not monitor an engine chose to fly 940 miles backward rather than 3 hours forward. And the woman who signed the offer told him to do it. He paused. "I am an engineer," Ito said. "I do not care about the vote. I care that when the system lied, the people did not." At 1:40 in the afternoon, Anchorage time, Nakamura Heavy Industries signed. Not for $140 million. For $165 over 9 years, with a joint development clause on the fire detect architecture that Ellen Park later described on a phone call as the single most valuable 11 lines of contract language in the history of this company. Marcus sat down on the floor. Just sat down right there with his back against the wall of the FBO conference room, and put his head in his hands, and Ethan Carter stood at the window and did not celebrate because he was doing arithmetic. "It doesn't fix it," he said. Victoria looked up. "What? The contract doesn't fix it." Ethan turned around. "Ma'am, they'll say you got lucky. They'll say a customer felt sorry for you. And on Thursday, they'll still put a table on page 14 with 10 names on it, and mine will have a complaint next to it." Victoria Sterling was very quiet. "Yes," she said. "They will." At 8 the next morning, Monday, Ethan Carter walked into his own kitchen in Chicago after 19 hours of getting home commercially with a duffel bag and no sleep, and Sophie hit him at approximately the speed of sound. "Daddy." He caught her. He held on for longer than usual. "You were in Alaska." "I was in Alaska." "Was there bears?" "There were no bears." "There's always bears in Alaska." "Bug, I was on a runway." "Runways have bears," Sophie said with total authority, and Ethan laughed for the first time in 3 days, a real one from the bottom, and had to set her down before his arms gave out. The card was on the counter. He read it 4 times. Then he picked up his phone and called the number on the front, and a man answered on the second ring and said, "Mr. Carter, thank you for calling." "Who is this?" "My name's Grant Mercer. I left a card with your neighbor. I hope that wasn't out of line." "You came to my house?" "I did. My 6-year-old daughter was inside my house." There was a pause, and when Grant Mercer spoke again, something in his voice had changed, and Ethan, who had spent 9 weeks reading a woman who never changed her voice at all, heard it. "That's fair," Mercer said. "That's completely fair. I apologize. What do you want?" 15 minutes. "Say it on the phone." "I'd rather not." "Then we're done. Mr. Carter?" A breath. "There's a complaint filed against your certificate. It's going to sit open for 11 weeks. During those 11 weeks, Sterling's Risk Committee is going to reassign you. That's not a threat, that's a schedule, and it happens on Wednesday, whether you and I ever speak." "I'm aware. There's a corporate flight department in Denver," Mercer said. "Fractional operator, real one, good one. They need a chief pilot. $210,000 a year home 5 nights a week, and a signing structure that would clear the complaint off your record because a settlement makes the complaint go away and everybody moves on." Ethan stood in his kitchen. "And what do I have to do?" "Resign," Mercer said. "Today, cite family. Nobody will ever question a widower with a 6-year-old citing family, Mr. Carter, and I mean that with total sincerity. It's the cleanest exit any of the 10 of you have had." "Any of the 10 of us?" Mercer didn't answer. "Mr. Mercer," Ethan said slowly, "how many of the other 9 did you call?" There was a silence on the line that lasted 3 seconds and told him everything. 6, Mercer said. Ethan sat down. He actually sat down in a kitchen chair in his own kitchen at 8:20 in the morning on a Monday, with his daughter's cereal bowl 3 feet away and a card from a P.O. box in Schaumburg in his hand. 6 of the 9, he said. "Yes." "They didn't quit. They took better jobs," Mercer said. "Every one of them. Legitimate jobs. Real salaries. Nobody was hurt, Mr. Carter. Nobody was harmed. 6 good pilots got better careers, and 1 company got a talking point. And if you want to be angry about that, I understand. but I'd ask you to notice that it's the least violent way anyone's ever done this. The least violent. Nobody put a bomb on a plane, Mercer said, and he said it tiredly, like a man who'd made peace with a sentence a long time ago. Nobody sabotaged an engine. We paid 6 men more money to fly nicer airplanes closer to their families. That's the whole crime. And in 9 days, a board is going to look at a table with 10 names on it and draw the obvious conclusion, and not one line of that table will be a lie. Ethan closed his eyes. 9 pilots. 9 men who left. 9 men Victoria Sterling had watched walk out the door and had quietly, privately, in the part of herself she never showed anybody, decided were leaving because of her. 2 years of that. Mr. Mercer, Ethan said. Does she know? Does who know? Does Victoria Sterling know that 6 of the 9 pilots who left her were paid to leave her? A long, long pause. No. Grant Mercer said, and Ethan Carter, sitting in his kitchen at 8:24 on a Monday morning, understood that he was holding the only thing on earth that mattered. 210,000, he said. Yes. Home 5 nights a week. Yes. And the complaint goes away. It evaporates, Mercer said. By Friday. Ethan looked across the kitchen. Sophie was standing in the doorway in her socks, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear, watching him with her mother's serious brown eyes. Mr. Mercer, Ethan said, I'm going to tell you what I told my daughter last week when she asked me if I was scared. Mr. Carter, I told her a little, Ethan said, because it was true. And she told me that Victoria Sterling isn't scared when I'm flying. He stood up. You want to know why I'm not taking your job? It's not principle. It's not honor. It's not any of the things you're braced for. It's that I've got a 6-year-old who's going to ask me at dinner tonight how work was, and I am not going to lie to her in my own kitchen for $210,000. Mr. Carter, there is no version of this where you win. Probably not. Then what's the point? And Ethan Carter said, the point is that she thinks 9 men left because of her. And I know they didn't. And I'm the only person on this planet who knows that, and if I take your money, she never finds out, and she goes into that room Thursday believing something about herself that isn't true. He paused. That's the point, Mr. Mercer. There isn't another one. He hung up. Sophie said, Daddy, who was that? Nobody bug? Was it work? Ethan looked at his daughter. It was a man who wanted me to quit, he said. Sophie's eyebrows came down. Are you gonna? No. Good, Sophie said, and went to get her rabbit a seat at the table, and that was the entire conversation, and it was the easiest decision Ethan Carter had ever made in his life. He called Ellen Park at 8:41. He called you, Ellen said. Not a question. How did you? Because he called number 7 in October and number 4 last spring, and I have known that for 11 months, and I have not been able to prove one single word of it. Her voice was tight in a way Ethan hadn't heard from her. Mr. Carter, what did he offer you? 210 in Denver, and the complaint disappears. Did you record it? No. Ellen Park said a word Ethan hadn't expected from a general counsel. Ms. Park, he told me a number. What number? 6, Ethan said. He said 6 of the 9 took the deal. There was a silence on the line so complete that Ethan checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. Say that again, Ellen said. 6 of the 9 pilots who left Victoria Sterling were paid to leave by Meridian Strategic Advisors, which is owned 2 layers down by Harold Vance's son-in-law. He said it out loud. To me. At 8:20 this morning. He said it to you, Ellen said. Because you're a contractor with no counsel, no recording, and no reason for anyone to believe you over a board member, and he knows exactly how that plays in a hearing room. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Carter, I need you to understand what you're holding. You are holding a sentence spoken by one man to one man in a kitchen. That's not evidence. That's a story. I know. Then why do you sound like that? And Ethan Carter, standing in his kitchen at 8:43 on a Monday morning, said, because he called 6 of them Ms. Park. 6 men, And every one of those men is out there right now flying a nicer airplane closer to his kids and telling himself he took a better job. He looked out the window. And not one of them knows that a woman in Chicago has spent 2 years thinking they left because she's in a wheelchair. Silence. "Ms. Park," Ethan said, "how many of those 6 do you think would sleep fine if somebody told them that—" Ellen Park did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Oh. Do you have their names?" "I have all 9 names. I have their contracts, their exit dates, and their forwarding addresses, and I have never had one single reason to call any of them." "You have one now." "Mr. Carter, it's Monday. The vote is Thursday. Then we should probably start with the ones in the Central Time Zone," Ethan said. At 11:12 on Monday morning, Ethan Carter called a man named Wade Hollis in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Number 7. 58 years old, 26,000 hours, currently flying a Falcon for an energy company. "Yeah. Mr. Hollis, my name's Ethan Carter. I'm the pilot who took the Sterling job after you." The pause on the other end was 11 seconds long. Ethan counted. "I got nothing to say about that. I know. So why are you calling?" "Because a man named Grant Mercer told me this morning that 6 of the 9 pilots who left Victoria Sterling were paid to leave," Ethan said. "And I'm calling to find out if you were one of them, and I'm going to tell you right now before you answer that I'm not calling to make you feel bad. I don't care about the money. You took a better job. Anybody would." Silence. "Mr. Hollis." "How's she doing?" Wade Hollis said, and Ethan closed his eyes because there it was. "Not good," he said. "There's a board vote Thursday. There's a memo with a table on page 14. 10 names on it. 9 pilots who quit, and 1 who's got a safety complaint filed on him 14 minutes after he landed." A beat. The argument is that she's the reason. That in 14 months, 10 pilots is a pattern, and the pattern is her. Wade Hollis didn't say anything for a very long time. "I flew her 11 times, he finally said. 11 trips. You know what she did the second one, Denver? Weather went to hell, and I told her we were going to sit for an hour, and she said fine, and she didn't say another word about it. Didn't push. Didn't ask me to try. First executive I ever flew who didn't ask me to try." "I know. They called me in October." Hollis's voice had gone rough. "Guy in a nice coat. Said there was a Falcon seat in Tulsa home every night. My mother's in Tulsa. She's 84. She's got dementia. 84 years old. And I'm flying out of Chicago." He stopped. "You know what he said to me? He said, nobody would ever question a man going home for his mother." Ethan sat down on the edge of his kitchen table. "He said something like that to me too," he said. "He's good at it. He's very good at it." "Mr. Carter." Wade Hollis's voice had changed. "You telling me she thinks I left because of the chair?" "I'm telling you," Ethan said carefully, "that she's watched 9 men walk out in 14 months, and nobody ever gave her a reason she believed." The line was quiet. Then Wade Hollis, 58 years old, 26,000 hours, said, "Give me the lawyer's number." At 2:40 in the afternoon, Ellen Park called Ethan back, and her voice was doing something strange. "4, she said. "4 what?" "4 of them are in." Hollis called 2 others himself. "Hollis is calling people Mr. Carter. I did not tell him to do that. He just started doing it." She sounded winded. "Number 4 is a man named Rossi in Milwaukee, and he's already emailed me a copy of his settlement agreement. And he did not ask me a single question about liability, he just sent it. That's 4 out of 6. 4 out of 6 in 6 hours. A pause. "And Mr. Carter, number 3, isn't one of the 6. Number 3 never got a call. He just quit." "Then why is he talking to you?" "He isn't," Ellen said. "He called me 20 minutes ago. He said he heard from Hollis and he wants to give a statement about something he saw." "About what?" Ellen Park took a breath. "He says that 14 months ago, 3 weeks before he quit, Harold Vance asked him to lunch," she said. "And he says that at that lunch, Harold Vance asked him a question." What question? He asked him. Ellen said, how difficult it was to fly with her. Ethan didn't say anything. And number 3 said it wasn't difficult at all. Ellen said. And Harold Vance said, and this man swears he'll say this under oath. Harold Vance said, that's disappointing. At 6:15 that evening, Ethan Carter drove to a glass tower downtown and took an elevator to 14, and Victoria Sterling was at her desk with the lights half off, and she looked up, and she'd been working for 11 hours. You're not on the schedule, she said. No, ma'am. Then why are you here? Ethan crossed the room and sat down in the chair across from her desk, which he had never once done. 9 pilots, he said. Victoria's face did something. It was the first time in 9 weeks he'd seen it happen before she could stop it. Don't, she said. Ma'am, Mr. Carter, I have been in this office since 7 o'clock this morning, writing a response to a memo that says I can't get out of an airplane. I have exactly enough left in me to get home. So whatever this is. 6 of them were paid, Ethan said. Victoria Sterling stopped. The room was completely silent. What? She said. 6 of the 9 pilots who left you. Ethan's voice did not shake. They didn't quit because of you. They didn't quit because of your schedule. They didn't quit because of the chair. They were offered better jobs by a firm called Meridian Strategic Advisors, and every one of them took it. And every one of them believed it was legitimate because it was legitimate, and that's why it worked. Victoria did not move. Meridian is owned 2 layers down by Harold Vance's son-in-law, Ethan said. Grant Mercer called me this morning at 8:20 and offered me $210,000 a year in Denver and told me the complaint against my license would evaporate by Friday if I resigned today and cited family. You? I said no. Victoria Sterling put one hand flat on her desk. It was the first uncontrolled movement Ethan had ever seen her make. Wade Hollis is giving a statement, Ethan said. So is Rossi in Milwaukee. So are 2 others. Ellen has 4 signed affidavits as of 2:40 this afternoon, and Hollis is still calling people, ma'am, he's calling them himself. Nobody asked him to. Why? Victoria said. Her voice had gone somewhere Ethan had never heard it go. Why would they? Because I told them what you thought, Ethan said. Victoria Sterling looked at him. I told them you'd watched 9 men walk out in 14 months, Ethan said quietly, and nobody ever gave you a reason you believed. And Wade Hollis was on the phone with Ellen Park in about 90 seconds. And Victoria Sterling, who had run a $2 billion company from a wheelchair for 2 years, who had sat through a memo about egress capability, without her voice rising one single time, who had told her pilot to turn around over the Pacific Ocean and lose $140 million, and had not blinked, put her hand over her mouth. And Ethan Carter looked away. He looked at the window, at the wall, at anything, because there are things a man does not watch, and because he had learned 14 months ago in a hospital room in Chicago that the kindest thing you can do for a person in that particular second is to be in the room and not be looking. It lasted about 8 seconds. Then Victoria Sterling took her hand down, and her face was wet, and she did not apologize for it, and she said in a voice that was absolutely level, 2 years. Yes, ma'am. 2 years I have gotten on that airplane thinking... She stopped. Started again. Do you know what I told myself? I told myself it was the schedule. I made myself believe it was the schedule because the other thing was, she didn't finish it. I know, Ethan said. You don't. No, Ethan agreed. I don't. Victoria Sterling laughed. It came out broken in the middle, and she didn't care. Then she picked up her phone. Marcus, get Ellen. Get her here. A pause. I don't care what time it is, Marcus, get her here. She hung up. She looked at Ethan. Thursday, she said. Thursday. Mr. Carter, when they call that vote, Harold Vance is going to stand up in front of 6 people and put a table on the screen with 10 names on it. Yes, ma'am. Victoria Sterling wiped her face with the back of her hand once and put both hands on the arms of her chair. Then let's give him the 10th name, she said. Ellen Park arrived at 7:40 that night with a rolling bag. a laptop, and the expression of a woman who had canceled something she'd been looking forward to for a year and did not intend to mention it. 4 affidavits, she said before she was all the way through the door. Hollis Rossi, number 6 out of Atlanta, and number 2 who is currently flying for a hedge fund in Greenwich and who cried on the phone with me for 9 minutes. Victoria, and I want you to hear that. Victoria didn't say anything. Number 2 is Brian Alcott, Ellen said. 44 years old. He was your first pilot. He flew you out of the hospital in Denver. I remember who he is. He asked me whether you thought he'd left because he was uncomfortable. Ellen set her bag down. I said yes. He said, and I'm quoting, "Tell her I have thought about that woman every week for 2 years, and I could not figure out why I felt so bad about a job I got promoted out of." The room was quiet. 4 out of 6, Ethan said. Who's missing? Number 5 and number 9. Ellen sat down and opened the laptop. Number 5 won't return a call. Number 9. She stopped. Number 9's the one who made the comment, Victoria said. About tempting fate. Yes. Then leave him. Victoria. Ellen, I don't want him. I don't want his name on anything I put in front of that board. He said what he said and he meant it. And he's the only one of the 9 who was actually what I thought all 9 of them were. Her voice was flat. Leave him out. Ellen Park looked at her over the laptop. That's a mistake, she said. Why? Because Vance is going to say we cherry-picked, and he's going to be right unless the list is everybody. Victoria was quiet for 4 seconds. Then get him, she said. At 9:20 that night, Ellen Park got him. She put him on speaker, and Ethan stood by the window with his arms folded and listened to a man named Doug Prescott, 49, currently flying charters out of Scottsdale, spend the first 3 minutes being defensive and the next 90 seconds being something else. I said what I said, Prescott said. About the fate thing, I'm not walking that back. It was a stupid thing to say, and I said it and she fired me, and she was right to. Mr. Prescott, that's not why I'm calling. Then why? Did anyone from a firm called Meridian Strategic Advisors ever contact you? Silence. Mr. Prescott. Yeah, Doug Prescott said. Yeah, they called me. Ellen Park's hand stopped moving on the keyboard. When? She said. 2 weeks before. Before what? Before I said it, Prescott said. Nobody in the room moved. Mr. Prescott, Ellen said very carefully. What did they say to you? They didn't offer me a job. His voice had gone strange. That's the thing. That's the thing I could never. They didn't offer me anything. Guy took me to lunch. Nice coat. He asked me questions. What questions? Whether the boarding took extra time, whether I ever worried about an evacuation, whether I'd thought about what I'd do if we had to get off the airplane fast. Prescott's voice cracked. And I said no. I said I hadn't thought about it. And he said, really never. And I said no. And he said, huh. That's it. He said, huh. And he paid for lunch and I never heard from him again. Ethan Carter closed his eyes. And 2 weeks later, Ellen said. And 2 weeks later I'm standing on a ramp and it's in my head, Prescott said. It's just in my head, and it wasn't before, and I opened my mouth and I said the single worst sentence of my entire life to a woman who never did anything to me except pay me on time. He stopped, breathed. Ma'am, I have replayed that lunch 400 times. I thought I was just an idiot. I'm okay with being an idiot. I've been an idiot before. Mr. Prescott. He put it there, Doug Prescott said. Didn't he? Nobody answered him. Ma'am, Prescott said, send me whatever I have to sign. At 11:50 that night, Victoria Sterling said out of nowhere into a room that had been silent for 10 minutes, he didn't pay that one. Ellen looked up. What? Prescott. Vance didn't pay him. He didn't have to. Victoria's voice was very quiet. He just asked him a question. Twice. And then he waited. Victoria. That's cheaper, Victoria said. That's so much cheaper, Ellen. He paid 6 men to leave and he only had to talk to one, and the one he talked to did more damage than all 6 of them put together because the one he talked to said it out loud where I could hear it." She looked at the window. "And I fired him. On the spot. In front of the crew. And for 2 years I have carried that man around in my head as proof." "Proof of what?" "That the other 9 were thinking it too," Victoria said, "and just didn't say it." Ethan Carter, standing by the window at 11:50 at night on a Monday, understood then that he had never actually met Harold Vance. He'd met the coat, the handshake, the chin up. He'd never met the man who figured out that you don't have to build a prejudice in someone. You just have to hand them a question and let them build it themselves. Tuesday was a war. Ellen Park ran it out of a conference room on 12 with 3 associates and a paralegal and an unbelievable amount of coffee, and by 4 in the afternoon there were 7 affidavits, 6 settlement agreements, the Meridian corporate filings from Delaware, and a maintenance work order signed by a contract A and P out of Wheeling, who had, when Ellen called him, gone completely silent for 40 seconds, and then said, "I want a lawyer," which was, Ellen noted, its own kind of statement. At 4:40, Danny Reyes came downtown in a jacket with grease on the cuff and sat in a leather chair in a boardroom he'd never been in and said, "You want me to say all that out loud?" In front of the board. "Yes," Ellen said. "I'm a ramp guy." "You're the man who noticed." Danny Reyes looked at his hands for a long moment. 25 years, he said. "Nobody ever asked me to say anything in a room like this. I'm asking." "Yeah," Danny said. "Okay." At 6 on Tuesday evening, Ethan's phone rang, and it was a number he didn't know, and he answered it, and Grant Mercer said, "You called Hollis." Ethan said nothing. "You called Hollis, and Hollis called Rossi, and Rossi called Alcott." Mercer's voice was very calm. "Mr. Carter, do you understand what you've done to 6 men who did nothing wrong? They're grown men. They took legitimate jobs. Then they've got nothing to worry about. Every one of them signed a confidentiality clause. Then sue them," Ethan said. "Sue 6 pilots for telling the truth about a job offer, Mr. Mercer. Do it Thursday. Do it in the room." The pause was very long. 210 was the opening, Grant Mercer said. "I know." "You didn't ask what the ceiling was." "I know." "Mr. Carter." And for the first time, Grant Mercer sounded tired all the way down. "You've got a 6-year-old and a mortgage and a complaint on your certificate. This isn't a movie. On Friday, you're going to be exactly as unemployed as you were 9 weeks ago, and she's going to be exactly as gone." "Maybe. Then why?" And Ethan Carter said, "Because you were wrong about one thing." "What?" "You said nobody got hurt," Ethan said. 6 good pilots got better careers, and 1 company got a talking point, and nobody got hurt. He watched his daughter across the kitchen coloring feet swinging. "Mr. Mercer, she spent 2 years thinking she drove 9 men out of her own airplane. You did that. You did it on purpose, and you did it with a checkbook and a lunch reservation, and you're standing there telling me nobody got hurt." Silence. "That's the part I can't get past," Ethan said. "You don't even know what you did." He hung up. Wednesday at 11 in the morning, the risk committee met. It took 19 minutes. Ethan wasn't in the room. He found out from Marcus, who called him from a hallway and sounded like he'd been running. "They reassigned you." "Okay." "Pending resolution of the complaint. Effective immediately. You're not on the certificate." "Okay." "Mr. Carter, it's not okay, they—" "Marcus." Ethan's voice was steady. "It's exactly what Ellen said would happen on Monday morning. It happened on Wednesday. That's not a surprise. That's a schedule." There was a pause. "She wants you at the meeting tomorrow," Marcus said. "I'm not her pilot anymore." "She knows." "Marcus, I'm a grounded contractor with an open FAA complaint. If I walk into that room, Vance is going to point at me and say the 10th name, brought himself, and every word out of my mouth is going to sound like a man defending his own license. She knows that too. Then why?" Marcus was quiet for a second. Because she said, if you're not in the room, he said, then the whole thing is her talking about you. And she's spent 2 years having people talk about her. Ethan stood in his kitchen. What time? He said. At 6:40 on Thursday morning, Sophie Carter sat on her father's bed and watched him put on a suit. Is it a work day? Sort of. You're not wearing the pilot clothes. No. Why? Ethan looked at himself in the mirror. Then he crouched down because that's what you did. Bug, do you remember when you asked Victoria why she uses the wheels? Sophie nodded. Do you remember what she said? She said her legs don't work. And do you remember what you said next? Sophie thought hard. I asked if it hurt. You did. Ethan's throat did something. You didn't ask her if she was sad. You didn't ask her if she wished it was different. You asked if it hurt, and then you asked if it hurt now, which is a completely different question, and you asked it because you actually wanted to know the answer. Sophie's eyebrows came together. Was that bad? No, Ethan said. Bug, that was the best question anybody's asked her in 2 years. Why? Because everybody else already decided what the answer was before they walked in. Sophie considered this with total seriousness. Daddy, she said, is today the day with the mean people? Ethan Carter looked at his daughter. Yeah, he said. Today's the day with the mean people. Are you going to be okay? And Ethan said, I don't know. Sophie nodded slowly. She didn't get upset. That was the thing about Sophie. She'd been told the truth about hard things since she was 4.5, and she'd developed the unnerving calm of a person who knew that in this house, nobody was going to hand her a lie to hold. Okay, she said. Then she hugged him hard around the neck with her whole body weight and no regard for his spine. Fly safe, Daddy, she said into his shoulder. The meeting was at 10. At 9:52, Ethan Carter walked into a boardroom on the 16th floor of Sterling Arrow's headquarters in a suit without a uniform, and 11 people turned to look at him. Harold Vance smiled. Mr. Carter, he said it warmly. I didn't know you were joining us. Miss Sterling asked me. Of course she did. Vance sat down and adjusted his cuff. Chin up. At 10 o'clock, Harold Vance stood. He was good. Ethan had known he'd be good. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture. He thanked Victoria twice in the first 90 seconds, and he meant it both times. And he spent 4 full minutes on Richard Sterling and the garage in Rockford in 1987. And by the end of those 4 minutes, half the room had gone soft in the eyes. Then he put the table up. 10 names. I want to be very clear, Harold Vance said, because I know how this looks, and I want it on the record that I'm not questioning Victoria's competence. Nobody in this room is. Victoria Sterling is the smartest person at this table, and I've said so publicly. He let that sit. What I'm questioning is continuity. He gestured at the screen. 10 pilots, 14 months, 9 departures, and 1 as of yesterday reassignment pending an FAA safety complaint. I'm not going to characterize why. I'm not qualified to. I'm simply going to note that this is a rate of turnover that would concern us in any department of this company, and I'd be failing in my duty if I didn't ask the room to look at it. He sat down. Nobody said anything for 4 seconds. And Ethan understood in those 4 seconds exactly how it worked. Vance hadn't said one prosecutable word. He'd just put 10 names on a screen and asked 6 people to do the ugly part in their own heads silently where it couldn't be quoted. Victoria said, Ellen. Ellen Park stood up. Item 1, she said. 7 affidavits. Vance's face didn't move. Sworn statements from 7 of the 9 pilots on that table, Ellen said. 6 of them state that between March of last year and January of this year, they were approached by a representative of a firm called Meridian Strategic Advisors and offered employment at other flight departments. All 6 accepted. All 6 signed confidentiality agreements. All 6 state that at no point did they resign for reasons relating to Miss Sterling, her schedule, her management, or her disability. The room made a sound, not a loud one, a small one. The sound 11 people make when a floor moves. Item 2. Ellen said. Meridian Strategic Advisors is a Delaware entity. Its filings identify a holding company. That holding company's filings identify a managing member. She looked up. Douglas Rennert. Harold, would you tell the room who that is? Vance said evenly. My son-in-law. Somebody at the far end of the table said, Jesus Harold. Item 3, Ellen said, and she did not stop, and Ethan understood that she'd rehearsed the pace of this the way he rehearsed a departure. The 7th affidavit is from Douglas Prescott. The 9th pilot terminated 14 months ago for a remark made on a ramp. Mr. Prescott was never offered a job. Mr. Prescott states that 2 weeks before that remark, he was taken to lunch by a Meridian representative and asked repeatedly whether he had concerns about evacuating Miss Sterling from an aircraft. Silence. He states that he had never once thought about it before that lunch, Ellen said, and that he had not been able to stop thinking about it since. Harold Vance said, that's a man rationalizing his own bigotry 2 years after the fact. Maybe, Ellen said. He said that too. It's in paragraph 9. He said he'd been trying to convince himself he was just an idiot because being an idiot was easier than the other thing. At 10:19, Danny Reyes talked for 6 minutes about a fire detect loop, and he was nervous, and he stumbled twice, and it was the single most credible thing that happened in that room all morning. It wasn't broken, Danny said. That's what I couldn't. I kept waiting to find the bad part. There's no bad part. It's a beautiful install. That kid torqued every clamp to spec, and then he added 2 more. He looked around. You put that many clamps on a fire loop, it don't fail. It gets jumpy. It reads the airframe cooling off at 41,000 feet and it goes, that's a fault. And it throws a light. At 3 in the morning. Over water. Mr. Reyes, a board member said. Are you alleging sabotage? No, sir, Danny said. That's what makes it so mean. At 10:31, Harold Vance stood up again, and Ethan watched a man who had been doing this for 22 years reach for the only thing left. Everything Ellen has said may be true, he said. I'm not going to insult this room by pretending I have a rebuttal ready for documents I received 40 minutes ago, but I'd ask you to notice something. He turned. Not one word of it touches the actual question, Vance said. Suppose I did it. Suppose all of it. The pilot still left. The turnover still happened. The complaint on Mr. Carter's certificate is still open filed by someone for reasons we don't know, and it will be open for 11 weeks. And during those 11 weeks, the chief executive of this company has no dedicated pilot. He spread his hands. I'm not asking you to blame Victoria for that. I'm asking you to notice that it's true. Motive doesn't change a schedule. It doesn't put a pilot in a seat. And that, Ethan realized, was the actual play. That was why the man was good. He'd just been caught, and he'd converted it in 11 seconds into the argument that the mess itself was the problem, regardless of who made it. Half the table was nodding. So I'll withdraw the memo, Vance said. Gladly. And I'll ask the room to vote on the only thing that was ever in front of us, whether an executive whose air transport arrangement has failed 10 consecutive times can continue to run a company that flies for a living. He sat down, and the room was quiet. And Victoria Sterling said, Mr. Carter. Ethan stood up. You're not on the certificate, Vance said immediately. No, sir. Then you have no standing to address a board of directors on an operational matter. He's not addressing an operational matter, Victoria said. He's the 10th name on your table, Harold. You put him on a screen in front of 11 people. He gets to talk. Nobody objected. Ethan Carter stood in a boardroom in a suit that didn't fit right and looked at 11 people who did not want to be looking at him. I'm not going to talk about the flight, he said. Vance blinked. Ms. Park has the flight data. It says what it says, and it'll say it in 11 weeks, and I don't need this room to believe me about it today. Ethan put his hands on the back of the chair. I'm going to talk about the lunch. Mr. Carter, on Monday morning at 8:20, a man named Grant Mercer called my house. Ethan didn't look at Vance. He looked at the woman at the end of the table who hadn't nodded. He offered me $210,000 a year in Denver, home 5 nights a week, and he told me the complaint against my certificate would evaporate by Friday. All I had to do was resign that day and cite family. The room was very still. "I've got a 6-year-old, Ethan said. "My wife died 14 months ago. I had $8 in my wallet the day I took this job." He paused. "So I want everybody here to be clear that I'm not a hero, and there's nothing noble about me. That was the best offer I've ever had in my life, and I wanted it." Somebody shifted. "You want to know why I said no," Ethan said. It wasn't ethics. He'd already thought of ethics. He had a whole thing about how nobody got hurt, 6 good pilots got better careers, 1 company got a talking point, no harm done, and he believed it. That's the part you all need to understand. He wasn't lying to me. He'd never once run the number he was actually running. He looked around the table. "Here's the number," Ethan said. 9 men left this woman in 14 months. 6 of them were bought. 1 of them was aimed. And every single day for 2 years she got on that airplane thinking they left because of her. Nobody moved. She never said it out loud, not once. I flew her for 9 weeks and she never said one word about it because she spent 2 years making sure nobody in this building ever sees her flinch. Ethan's voice had gone rough and he let it. "I found out at 3 in the morning over the Pacific Ocean when I told her I had an engine I couldn't monitor, and I recommended we turn around and lose her $140 million. You know what she said? Silence. She said, 'Go to Anchorage.' 4 seconds. No argument. And then she said, 'That's not me being brave. That's me agreeing with my pilot, which is the entire reason I hired one.'" Ethan looked directly at Harold Vance. "You want to talk about command continuity, sir? I've flown for 8 years in the Air Force, and 11,000 hours since. I have never, not once, not in a squadron, not in a cockpit, not in a war, had a principal on board who took a pilot's recommendation in 4 seconds when it cost them everything they had." He turned back to the table. "You're not voting on whether she can get out of an airplane," Ethan said. "You're voting on whether the man who spent 2 years making her think she was the reason should get to point at the mess he made and call it evidence." Nobody said anything. Then Ethan said quietly, "Mr. Vance, I've got one question. I'm not going to. 14 months ago, you took Doug Prescott to lunch." Ethan's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You asked him how difficult it was to fly with her, and he said it wasn't difficult at all." Vance's face didn't move. "And you said, 'That's disappointing.'" The room went so quiet, Ethan could hear the ventilation. "He's willing to say that under oath," Ethan said. "So I've got one question, sir, and it's not a legal one, and you don't have to answer it, and I don't think you can." He paused. "What were you hoping he'd say?" Harold Vance opened his mouth, and nothing came out. 4 seconds. 5. 11 people watched a man who had spoken in that room for 22 years sit there with his mouth open and produce absolutely nothing. And that, not the affidavits, not the Delaware filings, not the fire loop, was the moment the vote ended. The woman at the far end of the table, whose name was Constance Yee, and who had been on that board for 9 years, and had never once voted against Harold Vance on anything, said, "I'd like to move that we table the operational risk review permanently and open an investigation into Meridian Strategic Advisors." "Second," said someone. It carried 8-3. Harold Vance resigned at 2:40 that afternoon in a letter of 109 words that did not contain the word sorry. The investigation took 4 months. It found what it was always going to find because Ellen Park had built the thing like a bridge. Douglas Rennert settled. Grant Mercer's firm dissolved. 2 other board members went with them quietly the way people do. The FAA complaint was resolved in 7 weeks, not 11. It was resolved in the end by the flight data, which showed exactly as Ethan had said it would, an aircraft that had turned 940 miles backward, with a loop fault and 4,000 pounds of fuel nobody had required him to carry. The investigator who closed the file, a career man out of the DePlains office, named Ray Boland, called Ethan personally, which was not procedure. "Mr. Carter, I've been doing this 19 years. "Yes, sir." That fuel load. A pause. Nobody made you do that. No, sir. Why'd you do it? Ethan was quiet for a second. Had a feeling, he said. Ray Boland laughed. You know that's not admissible. I'm aware. Yeah, well. Boland's voice changed. It's in my report anyway. Page 6. I put it in there, and my supervisor asked me to take it out, and I told him no. A beat. Fly safe, Captain. Sophie Carter turned 7 in October. There were 11 kids, a sheet cake and a bounce house Ethan had rented for 4 hours, and would be finding pieces of grass from in his truck for the next year. Victoria Sterling came. She came at 2, and she stayed until 6, and Sophie introduced her to every single child at that party as, my dad's boss, and she runs a whole company. And by 3:30, there were 4 7-year-olds in a line taking turns asking her whether her wheels were faster than a bike. They're not faster than a bike, Victoria said. Faster than a scooter. Depends on the scooter. Faster than Sophie's dad. Your dad's slow, said Victoria Sterling, and 4 7-year-olds fell over. Ethan stood by the grill and watched it. Mrs. Kaminsky came and stood next to him and said, That's the CEO. That's the CEO. Mrs. Kaminsky watched for a while. She's laughing, she said. Yeah? Ethan. Mrs. Kaminsky patted his arm once. Sarah would have liked her. And Ethan Carter, 41 years old, standing at a grill in his own backyard with a spatula in his hand, said yeah, she would have. And it did not hurt the way it would have a year ago. It hurt a different way, the way weather hurts. Always there. You dress for it. He got them all cake. At the end of the night, after the last kid was gone and Sophie was asleep on the couch in her shoes, Victoria Sterling was in the driveway and Ethan walked her out. Thank you for coming, he said. She asked me? She asks everybody. She asked the mailman. Did the mailman come? The mailman did not come. Then I'm ahead of the mailman, Victoria said, and Ethan laughed, and then they stood there for a second in the dark. Mr. Carter. Ma'am? 9 weeks ago I told you not to make me regret it. I remember. Victoria Sterling looked at the house, at the lit window, at the wreckage of a 7-year-old's birthday party all over a lawn in Chicago. I want you to understand something, she said. And then I'm never going to say it again, so listen the first time. Okay? I didn't hire you because you were the best pilot who applied. She turned and looked at him. You weren't. Number 2 had more hours. Number 5 had more type ratings. Whitmore told me you were the 10th best resume he'd shown me in 14 months. Ethan said nothing. I hired you, Victoria said, because you were the only one of the 10 who asked me a question about my job. She let that sit. Every one of those men walked into my office and looked at the chair and started managing it, working around it, being careful. And you sat down and asked me whether any of the 9 had ever given me a reason I believed. Her voice was very steady. Nobody had ever asked me that, Mr. Carter. In 2 years. Not my board, not my counsel, not my assistant, not my doctors, not one person. And you asked it in an interview, before you had the job, when you had $8 in your wallet and every reason on earth to keep your mouth shut. Ethan looked at the driveway. It wasn't strategy, he said. I know. I just wanted to know the answer. I know, Victoria said. That's the entire point. That's what your daughter does too. She asked me if it hurt, and then she asked if it hurt now. And those are 2 different questions, and everybody else on earth only ever asks the first one because they already decided the answer to the second. She was quiet for a second. You didn't restore my career, Mr. Carter, she said. The affidavits did that. Ellen did that. Danny Reyes and 7 pilots and a 71-year-old man in Setagaya did that. Then what did I do? Victoria Sterling looked at him. You showed up, she said. Every single day. When it got hard, and then when it got worse, and then when a man offered you $210,000 and a way out with your name still clean. Her hands were still on the arms of her chair. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's all it ever was. Ma'am, 9 men left me. Victoria said. And for 2 years I believed something about myself that wasn't true, and I built an entire life on top of it, and I was very, very good at it. I ran a company on top of it, and you took the whole thing apart by refusing to leave. She started toward her car. Then she stopped. Tokyo's in 3 weeks, she said. 14 hours. I'll be there. Weather's going to be bad. Then I'll put extra fuel on. Victoria Sterling laughed a real one out loud in a driveway in Chicago at 10 o'clock at night and said, "Good night, Ethan." It was the first time she had ever used his name. "Good night, Victoria," he said. He went inside. He picked his daughter up off the couch, shoes and all, and carried her down the hall, and she woke up halfway and mumbled something about cake, and he said tomorrow bug, and she said promise, and he said promise. He tucked her in. He stood in the doorway for a second, the way he had every night for 14 months, the way he would every night for years, watching his daughter breathe in the dark. 9 pilots had refused the job. 6 had been paid to leave it. 1 had been aimed like a weapon at a woman who'd already survived the worst day of her life once. And a widower